What if Bella chose the Cullens and experimented with blood? Ever since one Edward Cullen waltzed into my life, it has been utterly irrevocably fucked. It all started on my first day of school at Forks High, when he spent a whole biology class staring at me like he was going to murder me. When I next saw him, he became weirdly friendly. Then when he stopped a van from running me over, he tried to gaslight into ignoring the evidence that he had done, that he stopped some creeps from attacking me in Port Angeles and treated me to pasta, which was nice of him, I guess. Eventually I figured out that he is a vampire. He insisted that I must think he is a monster. Bold of him to tell me what I think when I am the one person whose mind he cannot read. In fact, I was quite enamored with the possibility of becoming a vampire myself. Becoming invulnerable, immortal, graceful, hell, sign me up. Edward, on the other hand, made preserving my humanity his #1 mission. The most poignant exhibit of this was when I went to watch his family play baseball and ended up pursued and bitten by a deranged nomad vampire. Long story. The important bit of it is that while his brothers were busy actually fighting the threat, all Edward could think of was sucking the venom out of my wound to prevent me from changing. Thus I was still a vulnerable human when I turned 18 that summer. Edward's sister Alice, my best friend, had insisted on throwing me a very unwanted birthday party. Did I mention yet that my blood smells especially tempting to vampires, or that to Edward, it smells so irresistibly delicious that I am his so-called singer, which he is instinctually driven to kill on first sight, or that Edward's brother, Jasper, the least in control of the bunch, has an empathic ability that makes him feel everything the rest feel anyway. Not a good climate in which to get a paper cut on the wrapping of one of the presents at that damn party. Worse, to be thrown into a stack of glass plates by your overprotective idiot boyfriend. He claims Jasper was going to take a bite out of me, but I don't know what to believe anymore. What I do know is that Edward proceeded to break up with me in the worst way possible. Just days after the party, he took me into the forest, convinced me I was worthless, and basically left me for dead. What followed were months of depression. Eventually my friends at the La Push reservation managed to drag me out of it, and I became alive again, until my best friend among them, Jacob, turned his back on me as well. Well, this was later explained when I found out that he had become a werewolf. It destroyed me at the time. The Cullens eventually returned to my life to make me fix one of their messes. Of course, Alice had seen a vision of me diving off a cliff and disappearing, not knowing that it was safe and for fun, or that the wolves block Alice's vision. Edward assumed that I died and decided to handle that by goading the vampire police into killing him. Alice carted me off to Volterra to prove to him that I was still alive. It worked, with the added bonus that the Volturi kings learned that I know the secrets of their world. That meant I would have to be turned into a vampire, no matter what Edward had to say about it. Edward kept stalling, though. He actually insisted that I marry him first. That is when I broke down. After all that he put me through, he would make me marry him before allowing me to be turned, which, remember, I would have to be under threat of death by the Volturi guard. So this time I broke up with him. Also, I decided it might not be so bad to stall my change a bit, now that Edward's age no longer factored into the equation. The appeal of remaining forever 17 had been to be so together with Edward on my own. I have zero intention of repeating high school over and over again. If I waited a few years until I was in my early 20s, I would be able to convincingly pull off a much wider age range. I would not stand out on a college campus, but also be able to hold a job or start my own company. Plus, it would definitely be easier on my poor father to wait with disappearing until I was already off to college. Moreover, while I hated aging, I found that I did not mind maturing. If I was to be frozen at one age forever, I could do without the teenage mood swings. Actually, I wondered how much of Edward's irrational behavior could be attributed to the young age at which he was changed. I decided that my brains deserved a bit more time to develop. The only one in the Cullen family with a fully developed prefrontal cortex was Esmé, who became a vampire at 26, and occasionally it shows. And thus we ended up here after Alice and I hauled Edward back from Volterra. The Cullens returned to Forks. Despite me having dumped Edward, the family was beholden to change me per the orders of the Volturi kings. With my future position in the family secured, I still spend as much time at the Cullen house as when I was dating Edward. Now that he no longer hovers over me and monopolizes my time, I have been able to grow much closer to the other vampires. Only my former best friend Alice is the notable exception. To my great disappointment, she has sided with Edward. When it became clear that I would not take him back, she never forgave me. I am also irked by how cold she has been to her husband Jasper. She seems to blame him for setting off all the events through the mishap at my 18th birthday party. I never blamed him and repeatedly loudly forgave him. But the censure of his mate weighs heavily on the empath. She is the only Cullen I am on poor terms, though, other than Edward, whom I largely managed to ignore. Carlisle and Esmé have quickly become more my parents than my real ones ever were. I had previously loved Renee, but I have always been more her parent than the other way around. Now that I am experiencing for the first time what it is like to be able to fully rely on an adult, resentment for her pushing too much responsibility on me is quickly overtaking the happy memories we have. I equally resent For taking away what I could have had with Charlie. He had been so sweet when I moved in with him, but after missing most of my childhood, we never managed to bond deeply, and now that I am neck deep in the supernatural world, I need to keep my distance to protect him. Carlisle has stepped in though, where Esmé dotes on me. He is my rock. We talk about my dreams, my ambitions, my plans for the future. Emmett has solidified his position as the big brother I always wanted. We play stupid games together, prank the family, and cause general mayhem wherever we go. There is a growing list of house rules, the majority of which Carlisle and Esmé had to make up after one of our adventures went south. However, they are not as strict as they could be, and I believe they appreciate the joy we bring to the family. Emmett's long-suffering wife Rosalie also fondly endures every antic, especially since she is never targeted by our pranks. In fact, while Rosalie remains aloof, she seems to have developed a grudging respect for me. One evening she told me her story, how she had been brutally attacked and left for dead by her former fiancé and his gang of goons. She explained that much of her problem with me had been the way I let Edward walk all over me and decide my every choice for me. It still hurts her that I decided to give up my humanity, but now that the Volturi decree has made it inevitable, she is much more welcoming. One thing we bonded over is mechanics, which I had actually become quite good at and passionate about after all of Jacob's lessons on motorcycle repair last year. She often voluntarily invites me into the garage, her domain. While my skill is nothing to hers, she appreciates my enthusiasm and patiently explains. Whatever she does, she has recently deemed me worthy of helping with maintenance on Jasper's motorcycle, which I love not in the least, because this forms the bulk of the precious little time I get to spend with this particular family member. Jasper namely remains firmly under Alice's thumb. Like her, Edward never forgave him for the paper cut incident on my birthday, and he and Alice collaborate to keep him out of my way. No matter how many times I have tried to convince him that I do not consider him at fault for that mess, the accusations of his family keep weighing him down, and he follows their orders. When we are in the same room, he barely talks, so he does not have to breathe in my presence. When sitting with us in the garage, however, he radiates a quiet contentedness. Spending more time with the older siblings has solidified my conviction that I want to be turned at a later age, as they graduated high school last year and are now allegedly away at college. They have a lot of free time for their own pursuits. Rosalie buys vintage cars, fixes them up, and resells them at a ridiculously high profit. Emmett, who is apparently really good with computers, is contributing to some really cool open source software development projects. Jasper has been writing a history book about the Civil War, and while he does not really talk about it, he sometimes lets me proofread sections. This is a future I can see for myself in a much more concrete way than I ever imagined when I was with Edward. Eternity to enjoy the love of my family and contribute something meaningful to the world. A few years of patience, and this life would be mine. Author's note: oh dearie, I got sucked back into the Twilight fandom. Well, enjoy this bit of insanity that is part world building, part crack and part love in this house. We do not support Edward Cullen being a creepy stalker at present. I have about 12k words of material that I am editing. Probably the fic will turn out 2030k words long if I have the perseverance to work out the full plotline that I have in mind. It is Saturday night and my old Chevy sputters down the Cullens' lengthy driveway. Emmett had called to say that Edward and Alice were going hunting together, so we would be able to have some fun without them ruining the mood. Naturally, I hit the road as soon as humanly possible. When I arrive, I find that only Emmett, Rosalie and Carlisle are actually present. Upon seeing that Emmett would invite me over Alice and Edward had insisted on dragging Jasper along on their hunt, Esmé had followed to make sure the two would not give him too much of a hard time. Soon we are all comfortably settled in the living room. Carlisle is reading an old 17th century medical textbook, shaking his head at the inaccuracies. Rosalie is scrolling through car parts on eBay. Emmett and I are engrossed in an increasingly ridiculous game of Would You Rather that we occasionally try to involve the other two in. Ella. Emmett starts very seriously: for your first meal as a vampire, would you rather have a boring deer or fight a grizzly bear? What's the catch? I ask suspiciously. I have an inclination that my answer to this question might come back to haunt me. The grizzly bear would tear your clothes apart, so you have to do a walk of shame back to the house naked. Oh God, I'll have the deer, I exclaim, my face red. Considering how Edward has been breathing down Jasper's neck lately, I doubt he'll leave me alone for the whole of my newborn year. Emmett Guffaw's lover boy really blew his chances, huh? His question has inspired me to ask another though. When you are put on newborn vamp babysitting duty, I ask him, would you rather have to team up with Edward or Alice? Ugh, I use my get out of jail free card, Emmett mutters. This isn't Monopoly, I exclaim, but he has turned around to address Rosalie. Yo Rose, if you could only drive one car for the rest of your life, would you rather have Edward's Volvo or Bella's truck? Rosalie snorts. If I get to fix it up nicely, then Bella's truck. Absolutely, we both cheer. It is my turn again. Carlisle, say you were going to the moon in a spaceship and could not bring live animals, would you rather bring your food supply in blood bags like donated blood or dehydrate it into powder? He stares at me contemplatively. I raise my eyebrows. He seems to be taking this question very seriously. Intriguing idea actually to dehydrate blood. I have often considered the benefits of keeping a supply of blood in the house, for when we cannot hunt inconspicuously, the summer is always a problem because there are so many hikers out on the trails, we often have to run as far as Canada to find a truly deserted piece of forest with our work and school schedules. That means we sometimes have to go longer between hunts than is advisable, like at your birthday party when we had intended to go on an extra hunt the day before, but Alice saw that we would run into people. I do not mean to excuse what Jasper nearly did to you. I cut him off. I do mean to excuse Jasper, that is, he is an empath who already shoulders your family's collective bloodlust. Then Edward decides to breathe down his singer's neck in his presence at every God-given opportunity, and now I hear that on top of that Alice forced him to attend without having been able to hunt. Who on earth imagined that would not end in disaster? I am positively seething. When I calm down slightly, I notice the 3 frozen vampires stare at me unblinkingly. Anyway, so why not keep a supply of blood in the house? Surely Jasper would have appreciated some. Well, that is the thing. Bella Carlyle continues back in lecture mode. In its natural liquid state, the smell of blood permeates through any container I could think to store it in, and it drives us mad with bloodlust. Even I struggle a bit when it is blood drive day at the hospital, and all those bags and bags of blood are just lying there willingly given. I wonder now if taking the liquid out would reduce the smell enough to keep some around. And if it tastes the same when you add water again. Rosalie pitches in, intrigued. I think it's a fun challenge for us to build a machine for this. Emmett looks slightly flabbergasted. He loves his wife, but she isn't one to take enjoyment from communal family activities. Had I ever heard her say the word fun out loud before? I do believe she is actually smiling at me now. I have some old refrigerator parts in the back of the garage. I'm going to see what I can do with those. Unintentionally, we get so wrapped up in our new project that we work through the night. It had already been late when we started, but we just couldn't wait. Carlisle stays home researching, while Emmett, Rosalie and I drive over to the 247 Walmart in Seattle to look at what commercial food dehydration machines the humans have available. On the way there, Rosalie studies blueprints on her laptop and Emmett and I debate the logistics of acquiring the animal blood to feed into the machine. We leave the Walmart with 1 cart full of machinery for Rosalie, 1 cart full of jerrycans, tubing and assorted airtight storage containers, and several sets of overalls in all our sizes. The cashier gave us a funny look that probably meant they thought we are running a drugs lab. Emmett's Jeep is so stuffed I have to sit on his lap on the way back, while Rosalie drives awkwardly squished between his large frame, the roof and an industrial-sized box of disposable gloves. I managed to catch a few hours of sleep. Back home, I help Rosalie set up the machinery while Emmett goes to collect blood, and Carlisle goes along with Emmett to prevent him from causing any disasters. In about 2 hours, Emmett and Carlisle return with a large jerrycan full of deer blood. Carlisle thought that would be the best animal to start with, since the smell is not very appetizing. That would hopefully make it easier to process without driving the vampires into a bloodlust frenzy. Still, while Carlisle returned immaculately clean, Emmett's overalls were shredded and drenched in blood. We start our first run. Rosalie estimates it will take 6 to 8 hours to fully dehydrate the blood with our current setup, but thinks she can get it down to 4 with a bit more engineering. As the machine does its job, she diligently works on improving her design, while I take another nap and Emmett cleans himself up. The machine is still plodding along in the garage when the vampires hear footsteps coming up the driveway. Carlisle, explain yourself. The man in question gulps and guiltily regards his wife. Esmé stares at her husband with a mix of fond indulgence and exasperation after studying the new addition to their garage. So let me get this straight. Emmett dragged Bella into some game, and then you decided to turn the garage of the house I painstakingly designed for you into a dodgy laboratory with volatile experimental machinery. Well, I am sure Rose made sure to consider safety in the design. Carlisle starts hesitantly. It's for Jasper's sake. Rosalie chimes in, bent over a piece of machinery and up to her elbows in engine grease. Bella pointed out how unfair it is to hold Jasper to the same standards as us, when as an empath, he feels all of our bloodlust, including Edward's for his singer. Exactly, Carlisle continues, knowing that working the emotional angle would be the best approach to placate his wife. We got talking about my earlier attempts to keep a supply of blood in the house and the limitations that made it impractical. I am hopeful for this solution and think it will make all of our lives easier, but especially Jasper's. I surreptitiously wipe away a tear from the corner of my eye, suddenly quite overcome with gratefulness. Where did that come from? I whip my head around and spot Jasper in the corner, outwardly looking stoic as ever. When had he come in? His golden eyes go wide as we make eye contact, and he quickly reins in the emotions. The tension breaks as the machine grinds to a halt. Hey Rosie, is it supposed to do that? Emmett asks carefully. Yes, Emmett, the cycle has finished. You can't smell blood anymore, or can you? No, he confirms. Indeed, Carlyle expands exuberantly. I noticed the smell was weakening, particularly the past few hours, but now it really does not smell like blood anymore. Rosalie looks very smug. I high-five her, then look dismayed at the grease print on my hand. She hand me a rag and a bottle of degreaser and starts cleaning up herself as well. Meanwhile, Carlyle has retrieved the inner compartment from the dehydration machine and shaken the blood powder into a petri dish to weigh 97.42 milligrams. He says, "We started with 102 liters of blood, so the ratio is nearly a gram to a liter. So shall I give it a try, or does anyone want the honors?" Emmett asks, grinning broadly. "I do," Jasper says quietly. "I insist. If you designed this even in part to help me, let me be the one to bear the consequences if there are any side effects." Esmé looks at him in concern. "Honey, surely you know we do not blame you for anything." "You don't," he answers, then adds in a whisper, "but we all know the most important one does. I could absolutely wring Alice's scrawny little neck right now, never mind that she is a vampire and I a weak human." "Never mind me." Emmett and Rosalie look ready for murder. They are about to speak out when Jasper holds up a hand. "Please, I want to try this." "Alright, if you are sure," Carlyle says eagerly and cracks open a fresh notebook. Well, Esmé rolls her eyes at him. "Let me record how much you drank on your hunt, so we can track any variables that affect your bloodlust." Jasper gives him a detailed description of his feeding history of the past 2 weeks, while Esmé holds his hand and he stares at the small container of brownish powder. Carlyle hands him a half-liter bottle of water and meticulously measures off the corresponding amount of blood powder to restore it to its original consistency. "I believe you should go back into the forest to mix it together," Esmé says. "We do not know yet if it will smell like blood again when liquefied. With Bella still in the house, we should not take any unnecessary risks." Jasper nods. He and Carlyle wave goodbye and disappear in the trees. 20 minutes later they are back looking completely normal. "It was odd," Jasper says. "When mixed with water it smells exactly like blood again, not specifically deer blood, though just generic blood. Somehow also it did not trigger my bloodlust at all." "Perhaps it is because you just hunted before," Carlyle suggests, but Jasper shakes his head. "No, I know how it feels to be full and smell the blood of live prey. My instinct should still react. This is different." "Then let's wait a few days until you start to get thirsty again. We can test if it is effective in reducing actual bloodlust." Carlyle contemplates his notes. "Rose, can you produce an extra 40 grams of the powder by Wednesday? That should be enough to keep up with his current intake." "The machine should be able to handle it," she answers. "It'll need help getting about 50 liters of blood though, and my husband has proven incapable of doing so in a civilized manner." "It'll go," Jasper quickly volunteers. "It is my food after all, and I'm stuffed for now anyway." "Let me help," Carlyle says. "Come, I'll show you our jerrycans and siphoning equipment." Esmé shakes her head again. "Let me keep an eye on them," she mouths at Rosalie and follows. Emmett also leaves, muttering something about another Walmart run for more supplies. "Can you bring me back a burrito for breakfast?" I ask at regular volume, knowing he will hear me. Sure enough, I hear him yell in confirmation. Seeing that it is only 7 in the morning, I decide to catch some more sleep and leave Rosalie alone to tinker in the garage. When I wake up some 4 hours later to Emmett unceremoniously dropping a takeout bag next to my pillow, I have no idea of the drama that unfolded while I was asleep. While I was dreaming blissfully, Jasper returned from his hunt, walking into the garage with a half-full jerrycan of blood. Clang. Rosalie dropped a wrench she was holding on the floor when hit by the pain he unintentionally projected. "Jasper, what the hell happened to you?" She rushed over and wrapped her arms around him. "Alice," he managed to croak. "What did she do?" Rosalie asked. "What did that bitch do to you?" Jasper hung his head and turned away in shame. "She left me properly once, at divorce and everything." Why now?" Rosalie wondered. "She has been treating you like crap since Bella's birthday. What changed?" "This experiment, of course. Turns out she and Edward aren't exactly fans. Edward was spouting some shit that suffering the pain of bloodlust is atonement for the sin of being a vampire, and Alice thinks him taking the easy way out." "Do they even know what they are talking about?" "Did Alice see us working on this machine?" "No, I think our decisions so far were too impulsive for her to see until I decided to be your test subject and she and Edward came to confront me." "Well, what on earth is her problem? She should be glad you are taking measures to not eat the girl she claims is her best friend." "That's what I thought, that she would finally be proud of me, but she said I was weak, that I disappointed her because I do not have enough control of my own to not harm Bella." "Bullshit, do you even hear yourself talk?" "No, Rose, she has a point. I fought in a damn vampire war for nearly a century and go ham over a paper cut. You have to admit that is pathetic." "Jasper, we are not having this conversation again. You told me once that I was not weak for failing to fight off 7 grown men as a human. I needed to hear that, and I believed you. Why won't you believe me when I tell you that you are not weak either?" Jasper nodded at her resignedly. "Okay, let's park her point that I am a weak loser. It is not her only grievance." Are you going to go on about how useless she considers you again? Think where we would be without you. You are our protector. James would have eaten Bella. Because Edward is too much of a pussy to fight properly. We would have been discovered ages ago. Because you are the only one pragmatic enough to do a good cover-up when one of us slips. None of us would have been able to be part of society because you are the only one who knows how to get reliable fake IDs and birth certificates. Carlisle may be our leader, but he delusions himself into thinking that he is leading a family rather than a vampire coven. You catch his slack, and without it, the Volturi would have long since come to take us down. She was properly worked up now. And why should you need to be useful to be part of this family? I look pretty and am decent with cars. I do not even have a gift like I don't know insanely powerful empath abilities or something. If this was about utility, they should be booting me out of the coven. If they want to call this a family, it should be about love, and you are the only one of my siblings that I actually love like one. At that Jasper started to smile a little. You make a good case, sister, and I know you love me. He projected some sibling love back at her with his gift to emphasize the reason for his certainty. After decades of pretending to be twins, they were very close. By the by, how exactly is she expecting this to work? Rosalie wondered. You are mates. She has to know she will hurt herself as much as you by kicking you out. The bond makes it impossible for you to remain apart. Jasper sighed. She wants us both to keep living here, just not to be together as a couple. Well, that's just cruel. What do you want to do? Rosalie asked. I don't know, part of me wants to say screw it all and go stay with Peter and Charlotte for a while, no matter how much it hurts, but I don't really want to leave, not when we just started this whole blood processing project. It is so odd how unfazed I was by the blood I was just collecting, and that after I only drank a small bottle of the dehydrated stuff so far. I really think this will work in much better than any of us could have anticipated. He sighs. I just don't see how I can stay around Alice and Edward after the stuff they said to me. Rosalie wrapped her arms around him for another hug. Don't let them get to you, she whispers. Emmett and I are with you. Esmé and Carlisle too, though they will pretend to stay neutral. And best of all, Bella, you should have heard her defend you yesterday night. She is on your side, and Alice and Edward won't be able to stand it. When I come downstairs into the living room munching on my burrito, I am blissfully unaware of the drama that went on during my nap. Jasper is on the phone quietly muttering something about assets and paperwork to someone he addresses as Jenks. His tone is rather sinister. Alice is resolutely not looking in his direction, but she has not publicly shown him any affection since he nearly took a bite out of me at my birthday party, so this does not particularly confuse me. Edward is clearly gearing up for lecture mode, probably to provide me a treatise on the disadvantages of staying up late, why I should not eat Mexican food for breakfast, or the many idiocies of our brilliant blood dehydration project. Guess I better finish my food quickly and head home. 2 weeks have passed. Jasper has exclusively been consuming processed blood and so far not experienced any adverse effects. On the contrary, his bloodlust has receded into almost non-existence. He still gets thirsty, but in a more human-like parched mouth way, rather than a burning way with a side of I want to kill people. The thirst is easily quenched by mixing up what Emmett and I have started to call the blood shake, some of the processed blood powder rehydrated with water. We quickly found that you do not need to add the original amount of water back. It is possible to make a much more concentrated drink that is far more satisfying. Jasper has been enjoying his reduced thirst, but still not really dared to go out in the town without Alice looking out for his future, and Alice has been refusing to do so, as Emmett and Rosalie graduated last year. He is supposed to be away at college, so he has been able to get away with hiding out in the house. The day this is about to change, Emmett and Rosalie are ostensibly visiting from college for a week, and we have coerced Jasper into pretending that he is too. We are making him run some errands in the town center, and he has offered to drop me off at school on the way. As the weather is particularly bad today, I am not surprised to see him ride into the driveway in Emmett's monstrously large Jeep. He came early, so I had still been cooking breakfast when he walked in. While I am not normally a large breakfast type of person, this morning I suddenly felt like frying up some eggs and bacon. To my surprise, Jasper sniffs the air appreciatively. This smells weirdly not disgusting for human food, he remarks. Thanks for the compliment on my culinary skills, I remark dryly. I notice he keeps staring curiously at the pan of fried goods. You are welcome to try, you know. He hesitates. I remember that while vampires can eat human food, it tastes disgusting to them, and they have to throw it up afterwards. I smirk. I dare you. You have been spending too much time with Emmett. Jasper looks affronted. He grabs a fork though, and reaches for the pan while maintaining tight eye contact. I spend a lot of time with Emmett, too though, and he will never let me live it down if I back down from a dare. He chews thoughtfully on a mouthful of bacon. This actually tastes edible. It must be another side effect of the experiment. I smile and crack a few more eggs into the pan while he grabs his phone and starts texting, presumably to Carlisle. Does it taste as good as blood, I wonder? Not quite, he answers, but it is a small miracle that I can actually eat human food. I do not feel any urge to throw it up at all, and my sense of taste might change further at present. I still have some regular blood in my system, rather than just processed blood after all. We finish all the food with Jasper eating nearly a full portion. It is time to leave for school then, and we drive quietly contemplating the revelations of this breakfast. In the school parking lot, he hands me my bag as I jump down from the jeep. His head shoots up, and a second later I too register what he heard more quickly with his vampire senses. The awful screeching of an out-of-control car, a familiar car on a familiar stretch of road, only now there is someone else standing at the end of it. Oh dearie, there is ice on the road, and Tyler Crowley's driving has not improved. Tyler's poorly repaired van comes careening around the bend in the direction of his on-off girlfriend Lauren Mallory. The angle is not quite as bad as when I nearly got run over by him, but Lauren does not have a vampire lusting after her to save her with his super strength. She tries to jump out of the way, but is badly hit and blood splatters everywhere. The world seems to freeze, blood rushes to my head, and I feel myself begin to faint, thus I must helplessly watch as Jasper makes to run over to the crash scene. He suddenly backtracks to open the back of the jeep. What is he doing? He has grabbed a large first aid kit from the trunk and is now running to the crash scene again at human speed. He has been moving at human speed all this time, remaining inconspicuous. There is so much blood, how is he not feasting on it? Call an ambulance, he commandeers. I vaguely knew he had been a soldier at some point in his existence, having only seen him wear the designer clothes Alice puts him in. I was never quite able to picture him in a military uniform commandeering troops. Now I can though, as I hear him yell orders. Yorkie, for fuck's sake, call an ambulance now, and Newton, go fetch the school nurse and some teachers. The boys spring into action as if Jasper controls them like a marionette. Eric stammers into his cell phone. Mike runs into the school. Meanwhile, Jasper has taken off his shirt and holds the fabric pressed to a large wound in Lauren's side. That seems to be the worst source of blood and the worst of her wounds, other than a clearly broken leg that is bent at an unnatural angle. Jasper rummages around in the first aid kit and produces several items that he begins to patch up the large wound with. By the time Mike returns with the teachers, he is splinting the leg, and moments later an ambulance drives into the parking lot, sirens blaring. When Lauren is carted off, attention turns to Tyler, who again gets away with superficial scrapes. Soon he is taken away in a second ambulance. Crash victims under control. Jasper now comes to check on me. Probably I look at present as pale as a vampire and seconds away from fainting. Are you alright, darling? He asks, worry evident in his voice. Please just get me out of here and I will be fine, I grit through my teeth. Between the upheaval and my presumably frightful appearance, it is not hard to get me excused from class for the day, and Jasper takes me back home. The short drive is very uncomfortable, with Jasper's shirt thoroughly ruined during his heroics. He is now bare-chested as he sits next to me in the driver's seat. I awkwardly try not to stare at his well-sculpted form. Previously I had thought that Edward was the perfect male specimen, but I had been wrong. His lanky boyish frame was appealing to be sure, but with reference material available for comparison, it is easier to see through the facade of the standard vampire beauty. That skinny build would have been scrawny on a human. I suppose he must have lost a lot of weight while wasting away from the Spanish influenza before he was turned. Jasper clearly hadn't been scrawny, he had been fit, not Emmett-level bulky, which was not to my taste regardless, but lean functional muscle. His build was lithe but powerful, and I once more wonder what his human life had been like. Edward so anxiously wanted to prevent me from finding out anything about Jasper's past that to this date, I have only suspected that he came from the south, because his accent sometimes slips in my head. I tend to imagine him as a cowboy, a theory which his physique seems to support. I briefly wonder what years of horse riding would have done for his legs still hidden in designer jeans, and quickly have to abort the thought and stomp down my spiking lust before his empathy picks it up. Alice and I may not be seeing eye to eye at the moment, but I shouldn't be thinking of someone else's man like that. Both as a distraction and out of genuine consideration, I ask Jasper to lend me his cell phone so I can call my dad. When he picks up, it turns out the school had just gotten around to calling him about me taking off, and he is predictably worried sick. It takes the rest of the drive to reassure him that he does not need to come home. He eventually relents when he remembers that I called him from Jasper's phone and hears that Jasper will be happy to keep an eye on me. When we enter the house, I dash upstairs to grab one of my dad's shirts for him. He smirks slightly when I look away. Well, he deftly buttons up the checkered flannel surprisingly. It is roughly the correct size, however, where on Charlie this shirt pulls a little at his belly, on Jasper it strains at his broad shoulders. We are thankfully interrupted by Emmett and Rosalie, who had heard about the commotion and run over to join us at my house. We are congregated at the kitchen table with them attentively listening to our story. All three of us are very proud of Jasper. Look at our little brother, he went from all let's eat Bella over a paper cut to look at me stitch up a human like him. Carlisle, fucking Cullen. Emmett affectionately holds him in a bear hug and wraps his knuckles on his head. Jasper only half-heartedly tries to push him off. Eventually Rosalie calls him off so she can hug Jasper as well. Were you not tempted by the blood at all, she wonders. It is so odd, I barely felt bloodlust even when I was directly touching Lauren's blood while patching up her wounds. He hesitates. I do feel sort of sick now, like there is a really strong pressure on my stomach. It has been getting worse and worse, almost like there is something inside me that should not be there. I become thoughtful. Jasper, I think you need to go to the toilet, I tell him. He looks confused and vaguely spooked. You ate a human meal this morning several hours past, you have now probably digested it. Wait, what? Rosalie interrupts. He ate human food and didn't throw it up. Yes, some eggs and bacon, nearly a full portion. He said it didn't taste bad. Wow, and he really didn't even feel the need to throw it up, she asks again. No, that's why I think he needs to expel the waste another way, you know, the regular human way. I think you are right, Rosalie concedes. The men's reactions are opposite. Emmett obviously thinks this theory hilarious, but Jasper panics. I haven't taken a shit in a century and a half, he says, accidentally projecting his panic to us. Emmett loudly guffaws. Don't think the mechanics have changed much in that time, he smirks. Or to the left in the hallway. Don't forget to wipe and wash your hands, I tell him sternly. Yell for us if you need help. He looks at me in consternation, particularly at that last part. Like a dead man walking, he absconds to the toilet and sequesters himself there for about 15 minutes out of politeness. I start loudly washing and rearranging the dishes in the kitchen, which blocks at least my inferior human hearing. Emmett, however, listens attentively at the door, with barely contained mirth. The noise I make does not drown out the toilet flushing or the tap running either. The glare Jasper gives Emmett when emerging from the toilet is positively deadly. But I trail off looking for an awkward way to phrase the obvious question. It went how I think it is supposed to go, he mutters. Don't tell Carlisle anything, I don't want this going into his bloody notebooks. Emmett is still laughing his head off Rosalie and I glare at him. Jasper, Rosalie grabs his hand. Think what this means, you ate real food, you are becoming more human. And you saved a life today, I add. There was so much fresh blood, but you didn't even seem tempted to drink any of it. He doesn't say anything, but I never felt anything as beautiful as the quiet spark of hope radiating off of him. It is late May now and on a Thursday we are all assembled at the Cullen house, even Edward and Alice, though they still do not want anything to do with our experiment which has been running for a month. Rosalie has been able to fine-tune the blood processing machine to crank up production. Her setup is now steadily producing over 25 grams of blood powder per day. Emmett is having a great deal of fun keeping her supplied with jerrycans of fresh blood to work with. Carlisle has filled several notebooks with detailed information on anything from the blood processing to Jasper's moods. The most fascinating discovery so far has been his sudden ability to digest human food. He does not specifically get hungry for it, but it does satisfy him when he is thirsty. His enjoyment of the taste also increased over time, and he can eat it without any trouble. Carlisle debated at length what must happen to it once ingested, until Edward picked up on the toilet situation in Emmett's thoughts and loudly proclaimed his disgust. Despite these odd human-like changes, Jasper is as strong and fast as ever. His humanoid characteristics have so far not included a need to rest. His mind and memory are also as sharp as ever. If anything, they have improved now. His focus is no longer distracted by bloodlust. Outwardly slight changes can be observed in him as well. While he is still extremely white, his skin looks like that of a very pale human now, rather than that of a corpse. He no longer gets shadows under his eyes when he is thirsty, and also does not sparkle quite as brightly in the sun. He still noticeably reflects sunlight, but by the looks of how the experiment progresses, he might soon be able to go out in the sun with long sleeves and a hat on. The most striking change are his eyes. We did not notice them changing at first, but thinking back in his vampire-perfect memory, Carlisle is certain the first brown flecks appeared in his eyes as 1 week into the new diet. Gradually they formed into a ring around his pupil, and Jasper started recognizing it as his original eye color. 3 weeks in, they stabilized as the most beautiful warm light brown eyes, though with a narrow golden border around the edge. Carlisle wonders if that border would still turn red with processed human blood, but won't even entertain the thought of asking Jasper to try. His new look has even garnered the attention of my father, who can observe Jasper quite closely as he regularly comes around for dinner at my place. Now that he is able to eat it, I suspect my father intuitively feels there is something supernatural about the Cullens, but simply doesn't want to know any specifics. The eye color change, however, is so significant that he cannot ignore it in Jasper's natural eyes are so beautiful that we collectively refuse to let him wear colored contacts. Thankfully, Carlisle managed to come up with a reasonably believable cover story earlier. The Cullens had explained their pale skin, golden eyes and pickiness about human food as a genetic disease that they all suffered from. Jasper has now apparently had a spontaneous genetic mutation that fixes his DNA. Carlisle threw enough convoluted science in the explanation to thoroughly confuse Charlie, so he But just assume the situation is normal, but just too complicated for him to understand. Dad had grown fond of Jasper though, and was therefore very happy for him, even happier when Carlisle told him a laboratory in Alaska had been able to identify the correct genome sequence in Jasper's DNA, and soon the rest of the family would be able to undergo gene therapy treatments to experience the same benefits. That last bit had been good foresight because Jasper did not long remain the only one to try the processed blood. All the supportive family members are now convinced that the diet is safe and are eager to humanize. Rosalie has been the second vampire to start the processed blood diet. Carlisle would have wanted to keep observing Jasper for longer, especially when he started showing his weird human tendencies. However, since Rosalie controls the processing part of the supply chain, it was not exactly possible to stop her from trying some. Carlisle has started himself on a diet that is part processed blood and part regular hunting because he was curious if this would impact the progression of the symptoms. So far there seems to be a linear correlation between what percentage of the blood intake is processed and how fast the vampire humanizes. Emmett followed quickly after Rosalie and seems to have made it his personal mission to try as much human food as vampirely possible. So far he has eaten every item on the McDonald's menu and won a hot dog eating contest in Port Angeles. Rosalie watches in fond exasperation. I cheer him on. Jasper occasionally joins. Interestingly, his humanization has gone the quickest of us so far. Carlisle theorizes that the human food must be the accelerating component in this. Esmé finally joined the diet earlier this week. Carlisle tried to hold her off as long as possible, wanting to test every possible option before risking his mate's health. However, she finally put her foot down when Rosalie and Bella invited her on a girls' weekend to Port Angeles for Mother's Day. She simply refused to be the only one struggling with thirst and unable to enjoy human food on the trip. Speaking of Esmé, she was currently engaged in a ferocious chess match against Edward. He and Alice were still sulking about our experiment, and at this point even Carlisle's patience was wearing thin. That left Esmé as the only one truly making an effort with them. This attempt seemed counterproductive at present, as Edward looked about ready to explode. Next to me, Jasper quietly gets up off the couch and walks over to observe the chess match. His stance is seemingly relaxed, but clearly ready to jump. Something in the emotions radiating off Edward must have alarmed him. "Stay out of it," Edward hisses at him. Jasper just studies the board curiously. "Not like you to lose to that play," he remarks. "I know I tried it on you a few times, and you always clocked it when you read in my mind that I plan to take your rook with my horse. I don't need to be an empath to feel that this is what pushes Edward over the edge. It's all your damn fault because you can't keep your teeth to yourself and don't have the strength of character to resist blood the proper way. You all started chugging that unnatural trash, and I have not been able to read any of you the moment you start. I was perfectly able to hear Esmé until Tuesday morning, and now I can't even read her thoughts about a game. She is completely focused on you. Broke my. If Alice's two outcomes of any of your decisions are not visible to her anymore." Edward speaks so fast I can barely understand him, but he must still be slowing down from talking vampire speed, purely to make me hear his accusations. He looks about ready to tear Jasper's head off, but I am not worried for him. Something about Jasper's stance tells me that there is no way Edward can take him in a fight, especially without the advantage of hearing his thoughts, which he is used to relying on. A delighted grin of pure joy slowly spreads across Jasper's face. I can only imagine how horrible it must have been to put up with Edward rummaging around in his thoughts for decades. Rosalie confided in me once that Edward had a habit of, when he was feeling bad about himself, baiting Jasper to think of dark memories from his past and then loudly condemning him for them. Apparently he had once also tried to slut-shame Rosalie for the assault she endured as a human, but she had burnt his piano to ashes and threatened to tear of his arms and throw them into the flames as well. Emma cheering her on all the while with the support of her mate and feeling secure of her place in the family. She felt no scruples about showing him not to mess with her. Jasper, on the other hand, had somehow been convinced by Alice that he deserved this as atonement for his past. Not anymore. This Jasper is strong. This Jasper is still basking in the afterglow of feeling the bone-deep gratitude of Mr. and Mrs. Mallory when they were introduced to the young man that saved their only daughter's life. This Jasper knows he made the right choice to be the man he is supposed to be and has no time to put up with whiny little boys. He does not dignify Edward's rant with a reply. He just stands there smirking happily. Man, he should do that more often. While of course he has the typical otherworldly handsomeness of a vampire, his former habit of lurking on the outskirts had kept me from properly noticing him before now. I don't think I have ever seen a more handsome man. Edward strides out of the house to sulk, and Alice follows after to console him. To distract myself from my growing lust for a very much married man, I start a discussion about the implications of what Edward revealed about his and Alice's gifts. "Jasper, if I may ask." "Well, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I know Edward would dig around in your head for bad memories sometimes, and he was always so insistent that I should know anything about your history. I just wonder what it is about your past that is so horrible." He goes very still, seemingly nervous when he answers. He resolutely looks me in the eye. I fought in a war. Well, 2 wars really, first a human one, then a vampire one. Guess which one was worse? My breath hitches as I imagine the destruction a vampire army could cause, and Jasper nods, clearly seeing where my thoughts went. A vampire army doesn't need to thousands like a human army, but no human army could stand against them. Battle was constant, and always for the same thing, blood. To this day the South is full of warlords who fight each other for territory to hunt in. The drug wars in Mexico, I ask. My darling creator Maria, he answers with a humorless chuckle. The bitch. As even Esmé doesn't admonish him for his language, this Maria must really be a piece of work. Jasper continues to describe how he had been a Confederate soldier, youngest major in the Texas Cavalry, when Maria turned him to fight in the army that protected and expanded the lands her coven ruled. He explains the horrors of having to feel the emotions of his victims and the chaos of the newborn camp. I always wondered how an empath could be able to stand a high school full of hormonal teenagers. But I suppose that would be a walk in the park compared to his past. He tells me of the betrayal of Maria's sisters and how they did away with them, of killing the countless newborns once their first year was up, then more positively of befriending Peter and later Charlotte, of feeling their love, letting them escape, and later being saved by them. I would like to meet these Peter and Charlotte someday, I tell him with a smile, and he smiles back. I'm sure you will. In fact, their property in Montana is likely the best place to take you for your newborn year. I have a ranch in Texas that is remote enough as well, but that is a bit too close for comfort to the war zones. Really, you have a ranch in Texas? I ask, wondering if it had belonged to his family and what that implied. Yes, I grew up there, or at least I found a deed that proved my parents owned it at that time. I'm afraid my only remaining human memories are of my military career. Before you ask, I do not remember either if my family owned slaves on a farm that size. They might have had a few or might have gotten by with seasonal hired hands. Either way, the archive with the census records to prove it burned down while I was still in Maria's army. Besides, it took a lot of research and reflection to gain a better understanding of the cause that I fought for, and then more to see how the effects still linger in current society. Even with a changed political climate, at least I can assure you that at present, I am a firm supporter of equal rights, and for all groups, not just the one that I most wronged in particular. I suppose that does make a difference, I remark. Rosalie snorts. Well, if you ever wonder if he is repentant enough, look into the Whitlock Foundation. He amassed an absolute fortune of prize money during the vampire wars, but refuses to use any of it for himself. Instead, he finances a whole bunch of charities that help fight poverty among and improve the education and career development of primarily people of color. Whitlock, I ask. My original surname, he says. Major Jasper Whitlock, at your service, Mom. Oh dearie, my panties are flooding. I am suddenly glad that he usually hides the accent. The world is not ready for Jasper with a Texan drawl. I struggle to focus when he speaks again. The strong reason I was happy to take Rosalie's name as her supposed sibling is that my human self still shows up in the occasional history book. I don't want anyone to connect me to the Confederacy, but I kept my family name for the foundation. I do rather like the name, and if I create a sufficiently positive legacy for it, I might someday feel comfortable using it again. I hope so, I tell him. It suits you. Jasper looks embarrassed and quickly changes the subject. Anyway, the story is not done yet. He goes on to explain how he met Alice, and they joined the Cullens. At this part, the pain in his eyes is evident. Peter and Charlotte had saved him, but Alice had been his salvation. As a human-killing nomad traveling with fellow damaged war veterans, he had existed, but not lived. Alice had taught him how to hunt prey that he could not feel the emotions of, brought him to his new warm understanding. Family, and most of all, she had promised him the everlasting love of a mate. The first two she couldn't take from him, but the third hurt the most. We all stare at the door that Edward and Alice had disappeared through. Jasper, you said that when you were infatuated with Maria, you hadn't learned what true love is yet. Are you sure you have learned it now? He doesn't answer my question. 3 months have passed since we started the experiment. Except for Edward and Alice, all Cullens have now at least partly converted to a diet of processed animal blood. The changes are remarkable. One day Carlisle came home from his shift at the hospital nearly overcome with emotion. There had been a birthday cake for a colleague, and his team was so happy that he joined them in eating a slice. For once, he had not realized how much of the social bonding he had missed by not taking part in any food-related team activities. This event also inspired Esmé's new passion for charity bake sales. She had often wanted to help out with those, but without the ability to test her creations, she had not dared to feed them to the humans. Now nothing was stopping her, and at least every other weekend, she organizes something and rakes in serious cash for various charities, the local public library, food bank, and domestic violence shelter had never been quite so well funded, not in the least because her husband relishes in trying every one of her baked goods, now that he is able to, and always makes a sizable donation in return. Rosalie and I are often dragged into these schemes. Emmett actively wants to participate, but was banned from the kitchen by Esmé after a particularly messy incident with a large bag of flour. My participation was initially mandatory on account of me having the most experience cooking and baking, but as Esmé and Rosalie slowly got comfortable around the oven, I can thankfully back out more often. Against my expectations, Rosalie absolutely came to love this activity once she got over her apprehensions. The baking she does not care for much, but she loves chatting with all the small children that come to buy the goodies. Since becoming a vampire, she had always avoided children, partly because she was sad at her inability to have any, but mostly because she was horrified at her yearning to eat them. Now devoid of bloodlust, she can chat and play with them, and it goes some ways to filling the void in her life of not being able to have children herself. Jasper is always presginged into helping set up the stands and hanging up the decorations by Esmé. He pretends to protest, but nobody quite believes him. He clearly loves to bask in the happy emotions of his family on such occasions. One day a big package arrived for him from Texas, which contained a rather old beat-up guitar. His friend Peter had apparently kept it safe for him, while Alice kept him under his control, as the pixie did not approve of the aesthetics of the instrument or the music he liked to play on it, or anything about him really. Now this Peter apparently considers Jasper sufficiently emancipated to safely reunite him with his instrument. He brings it along and quietly strums out some country tunes while watching Rosalie dance to music with the children. Emmett, while generally inclined to happiness, has never been this happy because his wife has never been this happy other than supporting Rosalie. He still takes it as a personal challenge in this experiment to see how much human food he can inhale. Carlisle quite despairs of keeping up the stats for him in his lab notes. There does seem to be a sort of trade-off between how much human food a vampire eats and how much processed blood they need. It seems that when they are able to get a lot of nutrients out of human food, less blood is required to keep them from going thirsty. Carlisle's current running theory is that it must be the hunting instincts that drive the bloodlust of family members that completely converted to a non-hunting diet, regardless of what percentage of calorie intake is blood and what human food, all completely lost their bloodlust as well. While alternating between hunting and drinking processed blood, Carlisle still felt some bloodlust until he completely converted. Like the rest, they all still hunt animals to collect blood to process, but without the intention to sink their teeth into the prey and immediately drain them. The hunting instinct does not get triggered. Jasper actually came up with an idea to make the blood gathering easier as well, since processed blood apparently tastes the same, no matter what animal it originally came from. There is no longer a need to hunt wild animals. He found out that it is possible to buy blood from butcher shops for very cheap, as it is a waste product they have in large quantities and do not have many other uses for using some of his shady underground contacts. He set up a letterbox firm through which he can inconspicuously handle the purchases and is now having tank loads of cow and pig blood delivered to a convenient drop location. Very importantly, this solves the main bottleneck in the supply chain. Rosalie has long since optimized her first machine and has started building a second, even better one that has made the greatest limitation to our production capacity: the amount of fresh blood the vampires are able to harvest. Fresh meaning not clotted, which it would do if gathered per our current hunting method and transported more than 20 kilometers. While the vampire speed and strength meant the hunting did not take up that much time, we could not become too much of a burden on the local ecosystem. The forests around Forks could just about handle supporting the Cullen family, but Carlisle has started to consider converting some of his friends. It would be unfair to do so before we could reliably supply them with lead shake powder, and currently we still have only the one processing plant in our garage. Thankfully, something about the way the bought farm animal blood is treated or handled allows to keep it stable over much larger distances, thus none of the local wildlife needs to be killed anymore, which has greatly eased the conscience of particularly Carlisle and Esmé. Even Emmett, who still can't help himself when it comes to wrestling with grizzly bears, has become more considerate toward the environment. He is now careful not to kill the bears and lets them go after he catches them. He laughingly compares this to sport fishing. Speaking of Emmett, he is presently driving me and Jasper to Port Angeles after abducting us. When we enter the city, he finally reveals his purpose. We need to do some clothes shopping for Jasper. Why, the man in question groans. I have an inclination that Alice has often dragged him along on trips for this purpose many times, and the experience has not been enjoyable for him. Because you hate your clothes, you never gave back that shirt you borrowed off Bella's dad, and you have been wearing it as much as you can get away with ever since Alice bought all your clothes in a style she likes, but you hate, and it is about time you realize you can decide yourself what you want to wear. Okay, that is actually sweet, however it only explains the necessity of bringing Jasper on this trip. Why on earth am I involved in this? I groan. Because apparently Jasper likes your dad's style. You have to know where he gets that stuff. I say honestly, actually he doesn't ever really do clothes shopping. I believe he bought his entire wardrobe in the late 80s and still wears that. Ah, the 80s. Emmett sighs and veers the car around back when they still produced quality thrift store it is then. Soon after he parks the Jeep in front of a large thrift store and pushes us inside. Alright Bella, we need to find him at least 5 shirts and then give that other one back to Charlie before you get a complex about seeing Jasper strut around in your dad's clothes. Really Emmett? I roll my eyes. Emmett has been making such comments increasingly often and I'm starting to worry he knows how my treacherous hormones have been lusting after Jasper lately. To avoid drawing Jasper's attention to the conversation, I move towards a rack of promising looking plaid shirts. I turn out to be quite good at picking out shirts that Jasper likes, and Emmett discovers a hidden talent for finding jeans that cling to him in an absolutely sinful way. Yes, this man definitely spent some quality time on a horse to get a butt like that. Eventually he stops pretending that he dosed like our shopping trip and emerges from a rack holding a worn leather biker jacket. Emmett and I whoop appreciatively. In the end Emmett has snuck in a few plaid shirts into the cart for himself as well, and I have found a nice oversized sweater that will help keep me warm in the Forks climate. Passing through the accessories section on the way to the checkout, Jasper is drawn to a vintage-looking pair of aviator sunglasses. Meanwhile Emmett tries on a baseball cap. Maudie mutters and studies his face in a nearby mirror. What, I ask? I think my hair has grown. When I wore hats before my hair would be barely pushed past my eyebrows, but now it is in my eyes. Jasper appears next to him in a flash and pushes him away from the mirror to study his own hair. Because his blonde hair is so curly it is harder to notice growth. He pulls on one of his curls to extend it to the full length and whistles. You are right, I hadn't noticed, and it is probably the one thing Carlisle didn't think to measure. The only thing, Emmett asks with false innocence, then wiggles his eyebrows at Jasper's glare. This is so cool though, he then exclaims enthusiastically. I know Rose has wanted to try cutting bangs, but she never dared because she would be stuck with them forever. Jasper can't help but smile at that. Emmett may be goofy, but making his mate happy is always his first priority, and Jasper is happy that his sister has such a supportive husband. As he peers closely at the mirror however he notices something else. Aw dang, I thought I was done with shaving forever. Emmett grabs the face of his protesting brother to study his cheeks where indeed some stubble has grown. No way, I'm so jealous man. I remember from my human life that I never managed to grow a beard, always cursed with a baby face. How on earth did you not notice this? You know I don't like looking in mirrors, he answers, annoyed, pushing Emmett aside again. I could so kill Alice for what she has done to his confidence, and I am not in the habit of feeling up my own face. I decide to diffuse the tension. Well, just imagine if Emmett could grow a beard and still had to pretend to be a junior in high school. Jasper nods at me in gratitude and Emmett guffaws. He appears to be plotting now. Okay, another stop on the itinerary. We definitely still need to get Jasper some cooler looking shoes, but I also want to get a haircut. I always thought that Peaky Blinders do with the shaved sides looked cool. Aloud we start to discuss hairstyle options for Emmett, but we know that silently each of us is thinking about the possible implications of this new development. If vampires are characterized by anything, it is their eternally unchanging nature. All previous deed-related changes were striking, but ultimately finite. Carlisle had even tested the fact after his eyes sans the golden border that remains had fully changed into their original light blue. He switched back to a full animal hunting diet for a week. His eyes started to change back to gold. When the processed blood in his system was gradually replaced by animal blood, the newly grown hair would not recede back into their scalp, though, or would it? Speaking of Carlisle, he absolutely chews us out when we return home, and he learns we let Emmett cut his hair without getting precise measurements first. The Cullens are all studying their hair now. Rosalie and Esmé, who have consumed roughly the same amount of human food, though Rosalie over a longer period of time, both believe their hair has grown a fraction, just a few millimeters, but Carlisle does not notice any change in himself, but he has barely consumed human food so far. Carlisle says he remembers being able to grow facial hair as a human, which I hope to see in the coming months, because I am absolutely unable to picture him with any of this, in contrary to Jasper with a beard, which I very much am able to picture, but desperately try not to, because my unwanted cowboy fantasies are rapidly getting out of hand as it is. Emmett is currently trying to convince him to grow the same style of mustache that my father has, which thankfully the family has collectively vetoed. I only wish they could convince Dad to get rid of his mustache as well. Later in the evening though, when I pass behind Jasper sitting on the couch with his laptop on his lap, I see he is looking up different beard styles. He notices me looking and shrugs. My worst scars are in my neck and they are the most difficult to hide. Fucking Alice, at that point I can't bring myself to care what anyone in the family thinks and gently wrap my arms around his torso while I look over his shoulder to study the options he is considering. Another side effect of the processed blood that I am grateful for is that the vampires are no longer freezing cold but take on the temperature of their environment like a cold-blooded reptile. However, that does mean I have no convenient excuse for the involuntary shudder that goes through my body as his comfortably room temperature one leans into my embrace. It is 3 in the morning, and I am woken to my intense surprise by a panicked Esmé standing over me in my bedroom and shaking me. "Ella, wake up please." "What is it?" Esmé I ask in confusion. I was loading blood into the processing machine and she does not seem able to form words but points at her pants which are blood-stained. "And you spilled some. I wonder what the fuss is about." No. Esmé takes a deep breath trying to calm herself. "I felt something inside me down there and then it just trickled out." I slowly push myself upright on my elbows. "You mean to say you are having a period?" She nods. "I think so." I don't ask her why she is talking about this to me instead of the literal doctor that is her husband. Lord knows I would have combusted in embarrassment if this happened to me and I would have had to go to Edward about it. "How can I help?" "Well, the thing is, it has been a while since I had a period. In my time we just used rags that we fastened in our underwear. I understand there are all of these products now, but I have no clue how they work and the stores are closed at this hour anyway." I lead her into my bathroom wondering if my life has reached peak weirdness yet or if there is another curveball coming. I lend Esmé some clean underwear and pants and demonstrate how to use a disposable pad, explaining that of the available options, those are probably the most familiar to her. I show her a box of tampons and explain how they work and what types and sizes are available. Halfway through a lecture on the existence of menstrual cups, Rosalie climbs in through my window. "Hey there, I was wondering where Esmé had disappeared off to and followed her scent here." Esmé was just having some woman trouble and needed to be brought up to speed on the 21st century way of handling that, I explain. Rosalie looks at the packages spread across my bed and, having recently been to high school, quickly makes the connection. She freezes and an odd look flashes across her face. I remember how deeply she yearns to have children and realize what possibilities she must be thinking of. She quickly pushes it aside though and hugs Esmé. Now I am a bit behind the times as well, but I believe the human girls all say that being on your period gives you permission to eat as much chocolate as you want. This sounds like a situation that requires cake. I smile at her gratefully over Esmé's shoulder. "I should have all the ingredients for brownies in the kitchen. By the time we are done baking and eating those, the pharmacy will have opened up so we can get Esmé some supplies of her own." We proceed to the kitchen and work together to create the most decadent triple chocolate brownies we have made to date. We are eventually interrupted by my confused-looking father coming downstairs. "Bells, did I miss a birthday?" he asks. "No dad, we just needed some female bonding time." "You just needed to bond by baking a cake in my kitchen at 6 in the morning." He looks at Esmé now, clearly expecting her to be the responsible adult in this situation. "Charlie dear, those are brownies and we needed some female bonding time," she says, laying heavy emphasis on the word female. Dad swallows thickly, clearly no longer wanting to know anymore. "Would you care to try some?" she asks when Rosalie pulls the tray out of the oven. Of course he wants to. Nobody can resist Esmé's baking. We chat with my dad while we eat the entire tray of brownies, and Dad also eats some normal breakfast. He has a long day of work ahead after all. I still marvel at how well he gets along with the Cullens. Now he has hated Edward from the start, of course, which I have come to see his point about Alice he used to like well enough, but only because of that summer when I had a broken leg and she spared him the embarrassment of having to help me shower and dress. Eventually he seems to have realized that I have other female friends that could have helped as well, and that outside of her helpfulness in this matter, she is a pushy and petulant child. The other Cullens, however, are always welcome in our home and he has even been to theirs a few times now that family dinners are a regular thing there that we can invite him to. In this it helps that me becoming a vampire will not necessarily have to mean cutting contact with Charlie anymore. Once I decided I wanted to become one, I had subconsciously started drawing away from him to make it hit less hard when I would eventually disappear, all the more so when I learned of the Volturi and understood that him figuring out what vampires are would be a death sentence. However, if I were to start on processed blood immediately after changing, I would probably only have to stay away for some months and not change too noticeably to lie believably about. The current plan is that midway through college I'll take a semester abroad, be changed and return, claiming to finally have tried Rosalie's skincare routine with very good results. It helps that it will now seemingly be possible to keep developing further as a vampire. However odd it is to think of a Civil War veteran as still finishing up puberty, Jasper is now able to grow a full beard of eating enough human food when he only remembers having spotty stubble as a human. Esmé's current predicament is further proof. Speaking of, the family is quite happy to age a few years. Carlisle barely looks old enough to be out of med school and physically isn't. It is purely his old soul vibes and the extremely high quality fake IDs Jasper arranges that allow him to work in a hospital. The children are all thoroughly fed up with high school and want to be able to spend their time doing something useful. They have all decided to gradually age into their late 20s if possible and then pretend to be cousins or something at their next residence. Dad will probably still suspect something is off. He is the chief of police after all, but not bad enough to put him in real danger, and he has been happy to get to know the Cullens better now that the extended timeline allows it. He and Emmett often watch sports together. Jasper he likes to drag off to the shooting range, since discovering they have that hobby in common. I once observed them spend an entire afternoon restoring a vintage hunting rifle without speaking a single word, and they seem to be having the time of their life. With Carlisle he has bonded over their shared "I am a tired parent and barely have a clue what I am doing" energy. Esmé and Rosalie he simply adores with his police instincts. He quickly sniffed out their abusive pasts, and after getting a slightly edited version of their stories out of them, he regularly has a little chat with them to make sure they know they can always come to him if they need help. Well, the thought of two vampires needing my human father for protection is quite hilarious. They both find it extremely endearing of him. When Dad leaves for work, the women in question wish him a very nice day and tell him to be careful. I roll my eyes, but tell my dad I love him and then pack my vampires into a car to drive them to a drugstore out of town where we can browse without the Forks people ogling us. Esmé gets herself enough supplies to last her a while, plus some extras presumably for Rosalie, in case she too gets her period. Then on the way to drop me off at school, we formulate a plan to tell the others. This will be necessary as apparently vampires can smell if someone is on their period. I try very hard not to think too much about how they have been able to smell that on me all along. It is particularly hard to keep a straight face in the classes I share with Edward today. Thankfully they are few in number, as after our breakup, he changed his schedule around to avoid me. Clearly he can tell something is up and almost seems tempted to ask, but he doesn't and still can't read it in my mind. Jasper calls during lunch break to move the plans we had to visit the library in Port Angeles this afternoon to later this week. He explains that he wants to be there when Edward and Alice come home, in case them finding out turns into a fight. Unfortunately, I had forgotten just how good the vampire hearing is. When I see Alice's head shoot up to glare at me, I know she has been able to hear the other end of my phone conversation. Even across the busy cafeteria she and Edward disappear, not to be seen for the rest of the day. In the end it is Jasper who picks me up from school after all. On the way to the library, he vaguely explains what happened at the Cullen house. I am never told what exactly was said during the confrontation, but I know it was really bad. I know because the result is Edward and Alice going on an extended trip to Denali to cool down. It would take a hell of a lot for Carlisle to kick any of his children out of the house even temporarily, and more for Esmé. Over the next few days I notice Rosalie eating more and more human food. I have a sneaking suspicion what this is about. She puts on a brave face, but by Friday she cracks. Thankfully Jasper had felt the breakdown coming, so we had made sure to get Rosalie alone with us at my house. We are cooking, and she stares at the open carton of eggs on the counter. There is one plushy little dawn feather stuck to one of the eggs, and it seems to be reminding her of her own lack of fertile eggs. Oh Bella, she breaks down in my arms. I still haven't got my period. I hold her tightly and Jasper moves closer to rub her back. When Esmé was so hopeful that I would finally feel like a real woman again, but nothing has happened. I have been on the processed blood diet for weeks longer than she has. I have been eating so much human food, but nothing. I must be broken. She is full on sobbing now. Jasper of course knows exactly what to say. He doesn't talk much, but when he does. He has a way with words. SHHH Rose, you are not broken. You are Emmett's wife Carlisle, and Esmé's daughter, our sister. Your womanhood is not defined by biology, but by how you love us, and we love you unfairly. Smooth. I don't know if it is our reassurances or the tendrils of calm emanating from Jasper that soothe her, but eventually her hysterics ebb away. Hopefully this will be a temporary setback. Rosalie had been doing so well since starting the processed blood diet. At least we will be there for her. Soon I receive another unexpected visitor at an unholy hour. This time it is Jasper who appears at my bedroom window. He ushers me outside. Come Bella, he says looking shiftily, I need your help. Let's take your truck. It's less noticeable than the cars I could borrow off my siblings. He is still looking nervous. Please, I know you don't like being ordered around without explanation, and I will tell you, but we need to go before anyone catches on. Wordlessly I throw him the keys. Go easy on the thing, it can't handle the abuse you lot normally put your cars through. He nods and drives off. The moment I have clipped in my seatbelt, we do not go far. I look in confusion at the building as he maneuvers into a parking spot. The only other car there belongs to the employee who is just opening up the shop. Jasper, why are you taking me to a drugstore? Because you need to buy a pregnancy test. What? I yell. Jasper, I have never even had sex. I start hyperventilating, and Jasper quickly calms me down with his empathy gift, looking at me sheepishly. Sorry, I meant I need a pregnancy test, but I have no clue what to look for in the shop, and I don't want to ask a human for help. Jasper, what exactly do you need a pregnancy test for? I regard him suspiciously now. Rose, he says simply, her emotions have been out of whack for months. At first I thought she was just conflicted over the infertility thing, but more and more the emotions coming from her started to feel like two separate presences. I started watching her more closely. Then she has been eating such weird human food and seems to have put on some weight as well. I think back over our interactions in the past weeks. She said she needed to buy some new bras because the old ones don't fit anymore. Yes, Emmett rather extensively described his appreciation for how her assets have been developing under the new diet. That was another clue. Jasper looks like he would have blushed if he still could. Anyway, you see my point. Then the only explanation that I can think of that fits is her being pregnant. What I think is that we need to be very careful not to give her any hope until we are absolutely certain. Exactly, that is why I snuck you out to buy a pregnancy test without the rest knowing. Yeah, but not here. He looks at me in confusion. I sigh. Forks is a very small town. I tell him people gossip, and Mrs. Stanley, the assistant at this shop, is especially bad. Her daughter is in my class. If she sees me buy a pregnancy test, it will be all over town by tomorrow. She won't know it is not for me. Shall tell my father. Jasper nods wide-eyed and throws my truck into gear. No, I yell. He looks at me in confusion. She was looking out the window. Shall have recognized my truck parked here. Now I need to go in and buy something inconspicuous, or it will still be talked about. I dash into the store and grab a box of tampons just to make a point. I take a packet of chocolate cookies as well to snack on when we drive to a store out of town, as that will take a while in my slow truck. Jessica's mom eyes me suspiciously as she rings up my items, but seems to not find anything she can interrogate me about. While driving, Jasper and I discuss how to actually get the pregnancy test done on Rosalie. It is truly a blessing that Alice can no longer see our futures, or all hell would have broken loose already. In the end, the plan we come up with is simple. Among the statistics Carlisle has been carefully tracking since his family started their new diet is the mineral levels in their urine, requiring regular samples. Next test round, we would just have to steal Rosalie's sample and use a pregnancy test on it without either of them or the rest of the family finding out. Piece of cake, right? I still saw it going wrong in about 100 different ways, but in matters of tactical planning, I had learned to trust Jasper's judgment. We carefully ensured that the still bloodthirsty Edward and Alice were out of the house when the testing happened. Hardly a large achievement. A phone call confirmed that they were still with the Denali Coven all the way in Alaska. Jasper listens until he has heard Carlisle line up all his equipment in the study, then gives me a sign. I turn. I, the resident clumsy human, very believably accidentally break the glass I have been drinking from. Even after all these months, I marvel that the blood dripping from the large gash in my hand no longer turns the 5 vampires in the house ravenous. Carlisle, Jasper says at normal volume, knowing he will be heard. Bella hurt her hand. I am taking her into your study so you can patch her up. He carefully wraps my hand in a towel, giving me a conspiratory smirk. I feel lightheaded as he carries me up the stairs. Odd, I have not fainted at the sight of my own blood in a while. Was it even the blood? Perhaps it was the speed with which Jasper leapt up the stairs. I had not been carried like this by a vampire since I broke up with Edward. The first was pressed rather tight against his chest and could not help comparing how the outline of his hard-defined muscles felt with Edward's lanky gangly frame. My softer body tingled, and I could not get the image of that playful smirk out of my head. Luckily, looking dazed is the only other job I have in this plan. Jasper deposits me in a chair at Carlisle's desk and waits until the man is fully occupied in fussing over me. I do not even see him move when the arms clasped behind his back must be working to stir the pregnancy test through whichever of the open sample jars is labeled Rosalie. When Carlisle is done, we quickly sneak into the garage where the chemical fumes will cover up any lingering urine smell on the pregnancy test conveniently. This gives us privacy to look at the test result. The little pink plus sign is clearly visible on the test. Jasper's arms are around me in an instant. I'm so happy for her, he whispers in my hair. My eyes tear up. I may not be able to understand Rosalie's obsession with having children, but I could see how much she has been hurting, and I could see how much feeling her hurt has been hurting Jasper. Playing twins for decades and both having a traumatic past gave them a much closer bond than their more happy-go-lucky siblings. I found myself hoping that seeing his sister heal would help Jasper as well. Jasper suddenly breaks away, hit by intense emotions. Wyatt, we hear Emmett yell behind us. Damn, I'm glad the two of you have finally come to your senses about each other, but this is moving a bit fast, isn't it? I stare at him in confusion. He is holding the pregnancy test, clearly alluding to it, but what does he mean? My eyes drift to Rose, a watery smile on her stony face. I'm so happy for you, Bella. You will be a wonderful mother. Mother, the penny drops. Rose, it'll be an aunt. You will be a wonderful mother, the best. Her eyes grow large. Bella, you don't have to give the baby up to me. What about Jasper? He deserves a say. For fuck's sake, I am not sleeping with Jasper, I yell, probably far too loud, but all their insinuations have been getting to me. The test is yours, Rose. Jasper started suspecting when he felt 2 sets of emotions coming of you, but we did not want to give you any false hope, so we stole your urine out of Carlisle's lab to do a test on first. She looks at him for confirmation. Rose, you are pregnant, he simply says. It finally seems to register. She gives an elated squeal and drags us into a happy dance. Emmett's face momentarily goes blank until he breaks out in joy and joins our dance, his arms around Rosalie. Carlisle and Esmé next join us in the garage, perplexed but happy. We may not know what to expect for the future of this pregnancy, but in this moment none of us particularly cared. It took Rosalie several weeks to truly start believing that she is expecting a child, as echo machines don't work on vampires, she has to rely on Carlisle's manual measurements. Eventually though she started to feel the baby move around. The first time she felt it kick in her stomach was the most beautiful moment in her existence, even more beautiful than when she formed her mating bond with Emmett. Because that had been overshadowed by her regret over her vampire status, particularly the infertility and his death, this proof of life growing in her made her connection with Emmett so much more meaningful that she was never happier. However, neither had she ever been more hormonal, and her darling mate bears the brunt of the force. As the pregnancy progresses, her nesting instincts have grown stronger and stronger. She has started hoarding clothes, bottles, toys and other baby paraphernalia. Mostly we indulge her because we understand that to a certain extent this is her way of dealing with the fear of the unknown. Our family are the only vampires we know, likely the only in the world to be living off processed blood. Rosalie is the first to get pregnant, and we have no idea how the child will turn out and if it can be born without complications. Considering the circumstances, we are not overly worried though. By tracking Esmé's menstrual cycle, we have been able to figure out that this too progresses according to what percentage of the vampire's diet is human food versus processed blood. As Esmé roughly goes half and half, her cycle takes nearly 2 months. Rosalie has now converted to entirely human food, and ever since the pregnancy has progressed at regular speed. By Carlisle's calculations, the baby must have grown slower when she was still partially drinking blood shakes, but it does not seem to have hurt the baby, which is very active. These developments have also made us reasonably sure that the child can be born normally and will either be controlled from the start or become in control after being fed processed blood for a while, and that it will grow up into an adult vampire after being fed a lot of human food for a couple of decades. Nothing like the eternal chaos and destruction of the immortal children. It was a rough night. When Carlisle explained that bit of history and how the Denali sisters' mother had been prosecuted for making one, even Rosalie is quite convinced that her child will be safe, and when she doubts she keeps herself busy. The latest project is sorting out the living arrangements. She wants to remain close to the family, but also have a place for herself and Emmett to live together with the baby. However, the only suitable property is a small cottage on the Cullen land. Not only is this too small for her taste, but the roof is so low Emmett can barely stand upright in it. She doesn't want him to feel uncomfortable in his own home. Emmett, as any sensible man with a pregnant wife, would completely adheres to all her demands, as any man with a pregnant wife, though no amount of pandering will put him in the clear of her irrational anger. Emmett McCarty Cullen, I have waited a century for this baby, everything has to be perfect. Oh dearie, their argument is escalating again. I collect my school books from the kitchen table and run upstairs to hide in Jasper's study. Thankfully, my quickly approaching exams give me the perfect excuse to stay out of their business. I do not believe I would have studied half so much if I was not avoiding them. Jasper races past me up the stairs and holds the door open for me. He has volunteered to be my personal tutor and helped me so much that I might even get a passing grade in mathematics at this point. We do spend rather a lot of time holed up in his study, but he never seems to mind. He too must be quite eager to stay out of Rosalie's way. Still, with the continued absence of Edward and Alice, he has been more relaxed around the house. Those two expressed a wish to remain in Denali for a longer time, which we heartily encourage because of Rosalie's pregnancy. We doubt the Volturi would look kindly upon the situation, and Edward and Alice are not protected against their mind-reading gifts also. Either of them might just be petty enough to intentionally rat us out. The Denalists are not particularly happy about their long-term guests, but are willing to keep hosting them in exchange for the promise of Rosalie building them a blood processing machine of their own. They have been eager to try the new diet, but are not willing to convert before they have their own supply chain, since they live so remotely in Alaska. Carlisle has told the Forks High School a story that Edward and Alice received early acceptance into a university out of state and therefore sat the GED, thus they are now officially out of school, and I can focus on my graduation without their presence annoying me. Their nonchalance about staying an extended amount of time away from the family did trigger discussion among the rest of them, though particularly since they had not believed it possible for Alice to leave Jasper behind, her sockled mate. I learned then that vampire bonds work a lot more complicated than I had initially thought. As Carlisle carefully explained it all, there is the mating bond between the vampire and their one true love. Once formed, there is nothing that can come between it. However, before it forms, it may be surpassed by the sire bond between the vampire and their creator. When a vampire is on poor terms with their creator, this stirs a rather consuming inner conflict in them, so consuming that it might prevent them from forming a mating bond. Jasper quietly explained that since his creator Maria was still at large, raging for decades about his betrayal, he would not be able to form a full mating bond until she was killed. This was why he had been so grateful for Alice, who thanks to her future vision, had been able to see that they were mates, even if he could not feel it. Only now it seems she had lied. A few weeks into their stay in Denali, Elazar sent a concerned message to Carlisle. Apparently during his time serving in the Volturi Guard, some experiments had been run at the king's orders to test the limits of mating bonds. True mates, even without a formed bond, should not survive weeks of separation, as Elazar had never discussed these particular experiments with the Cullens before and Alice could no longer see our future. She had not known that her departure would lead to us figuring out her deception until she caught a view of Elazar typing the email. I had been worried about Jasper, but to my surprise he was mainly relieved. I learned then that Alice had divorced him months ago when she first found out about our bloodshake experiment. Frankly, I was miffed that nobody had bothered to inform me of this. Somehow each had thought that someone else had already told me. At least this made Emmett's many jokes about Jasper and me less disturbing, and my own growing feelings for him. At this point I might as well admit it, I love him. I love his sensitivity, his loyalty, his kindness to and protectiveness over his family, his wicked sense of humor, the way I can be completely myself around him, the way he gradually lowers his defenses around me, not to mention that his mere presence lights a fire in my body that drives me to distraction. Speaking of, I find it hard to focus on my studies as I am sat next to him. His arm occasionally brushes against mine when he points something out in a book, causing me to shiver. I get a reprieve when Emmett sneaks in, his finger pressed to his lips to shush us and gestures for us to follow him. We drive off in his jeep on some errand that Rosalie gave him. It soon becomes clear that he asked us along to be able to talk. He hands us a large manila envelope that had been lying on the front seat and starts explaining. Look guys, remember when I suggested to Rose that if she wants to live apart but close to the main house, we could get one of those reanimate prefab houses and put it up in the yard. I rather distinctly remember her reacting by flipping out that she did not want her child to grow up as trailer trash, Jasper answers, trying to keep his tone neutral. Ah yeah, there is that. I stick with my point that a prefab house is very different from a trailer, but whatever she wants anyway. Open the envelope. We do, and there are blueprints and design sketches for an absolutely gorgeous small family home. Inside, the style is a mixture of classic and modern elements, and there is a large porch where I can perfectly imagine Rose sitting with her baby in a rocking chair. It's beautiful, I exclaim. Thanks, I hope so, Emmett replies. When we got stuck in our housing argument, I asked Esmé to help me design a house that we can build near the main one, that way Rose can have her dream house, but we will still be close to the family. Jasper frowns. There is no way contractors will be able to build all this before the baby is born, though the foundation alone might take months with the bad weather we have here. Through the rearview mirror I see a dangerous glint appear in Emmett's eyes. It would take too long for human contractors. A few vampires with immense strength, perfect precision and endless stamina can build this in time though. Jasper glares back with trepidation, however, when Emmett confesses that he wanted a second opinion on the plan from us before he tells Rosalie, because he is afraid to upset her again. Jasper does not hesitate to reassure him. Shall love it, we both say with conviction. The whatever it was that Rosalie had wanted us to get was not in stock in the correct color, so we brace ourselves for her wrath when we return. She is indeed gearing up for another shouting match when Emmett distracts her with his peace offering. Rosie love, I have something else for you. He hands her the large envelope in which he packaged the designs for the house. Confused, she tears it open and looks at the contents. Emmett, it looks perfect, it's exactly what I wanted, but where is it? I thought we agreed to stay close to the family and we can't move Bella away from her father. We won't, he answers smiling. It doesn't exist yet. I'm going to build it for us, our own perfect dream house. I'm so sorry, she sobs. I love you so much and you work so hard for us. Her sobs increase in volume. You do so much for me and I've just been so nasty to you. Emmett looks rather flabbergasted. Apparently he thought the hormones would calm if Rosalie was no longer mad at him, but now she is mad at herself for being mad at him. From the corner of my eye, I spied Jasper inching away to escape her emotional climate. We sure never have a dull moment in this family, but I won't have it any other way. The week has passed and Jasper is beyond fed up. After Rosalie declared her love for the house, Emmett and Esmé designed. The matriarch became a hard taskmaster with me, human Rosalie, pregnant, Carlisle mostly at the hospital, and Edward and Alice still in Denali. Emmett and Jasper are the only family members able to do any of the hard labor on the house. Esmé herself is naturally required to oversee the proceedings, so can't help out with the manual work. Emmett is of course perfectly delighted to obey every order and has already happily dug the entire foundation by hand at vampire strength. Jasper, who is not at present mated to a pregnancy hormone-riddled female vampire, lacks the incentives behind Emmett's enthusiasm. I had come over today to watch the men work and brainstorm about the interior decorating with Esmé and Rosalie. Jasper had to argue Esmé into being allowed a break from bricklaying against her insistence that since vampires do not get tired, he should be able to finish the entire wall in one go. When she finally relents, we hide out in the kitchen where I cook us both an omelette. I called in some reinforcements, he quietly confides in me. A few old friends expressed interest in trying our new diet, and I figured they might as well give us a hand with this stupid house. The sooner it's done the better, though I expect if we work faster Esmé and Rosalie will just come up with extra things to add to it. Will I finally get to meet Peter and Charlotte then, I wonder? Yes, they are quite curious about you. A nomad called Garrett as well. He is an old friend of Carlyle's who knows Peter and Char through me. They just happened to run into each other when I called. What a coincidence, I remark. Not really, Jasper smiles. Peter has this very strong sense of intuition that he refuses to call a gift. Sometimes he just knows something like that he needs to be in a certain place. He and Char rarely leave Montana, but they were in Garrett's favorite stomping grounds in downtown Boston when I called. Jasper stills to listen to something outside that I cannot pick up without vampire hearing. Looks like we will have a full house, he says. Esmé was just on the phone with Kate Denali. Apparently having Edward and Alice sulk in their home has been driving the sisters nuts, and now Kate is asking to stay with us for a while. She might change her mind if Esmé puts her to work, I remark dryly. Jasper gets up, signaling that break time is over. Believe me, at present, I would gladly build 100 houses to avoid their guests, even if Esmé and Rosalie keep yelling at me. Again I wonder just how bad things had been between him and Alice, but I don't want to pry. Instead I crack a few more eggs into the pan to make another omelette for Emmett. Kate is the first to arrive. She had apparently already been well on her way when she called Esmé, figuring that she would not be turned away if she was already there. I am the one to open the door for her, as I am the only one in the main house. After Rosalie commandeered Emmett's omelette, due to a sudden craving I went back to make him another one. I had not met any of the beautiful Denali sisters before, but I quickly take a liking to Kate as we chat, walking over to the building site human speed. Jasper purposely radiates his frustration when Esmé urges Kate to sit down with her and Rosalie, since they have not been able to catch up in so long. Oh hush Jasper, she says, the wall won't look uniform if we are messing about with it with multiple people. You better finish it yourself. He glares silently and seems to consider pointing out that with their vampire precision, they are perfectly able to continue the wall, exactly as he has in the end. He decides the argument is not worth it and just continues. I park myself in a chair next to Esmé to enjoy the view. Over the past week I have learned that Jasper doing manual labor is the most distracting thing I have ever encountered. Since he does not need it for protection, he chooses not to wear a shirt to save himself the laundry. His muscles flex impressively whenever he picks up something heavy. The focused look on his face when he puts another brick in place with absolute precision feels very intense. In the occasional faint watery sunlight he glows ethereally, no longer sparkling blindingly thanks to the new diet. I had never seen so much of his skin and am convinced I would not have if Edward and Alice had still been around. The rows and rows of teeth marks stand out faintly on his back when I look closely. Frankly, I have stopped trying to hide my lust for him, at least when I am watching him work. The first time I spotted him shirtless on the building site he made to cover himself up. The moment he noticed me looking, he clearly tried but not quite managed to stop his gift from projecting his shame to me. It was then that I decided that no matter how much it embarrassed me, he should know how hot he looks to me. Since feeling my lust, he seems less self-conscious about exposing his upper body around the family, though he still experiments with different styles of facial hair to cover the scars in his neck. The day continues pleasantly with me quietly revising my biology notes for the upcoming exams while observing the work and occasionally contributing to the conversation between Kate, Rosalie and Esmé. Then just as the sun is setting, Jasper suddenly jumps into a defensive crouch, then relaxes again with a look of surprise on his face. A moment later a growling vampire dashes into the clearing, grabs Kate from her chair and tumbles into the forest with her. The women jump up and Emmett roars, but Jasper ushers them to stand down. We're so sorry, we hear from the other end of the clearing where two more vampires appear, one a tall man, the other a petite woman, both pale blonde hair. I have an inclination who these are. All of a sudden he just went nuts and ran off before we could grab him. What did he do? Take a human? I don't smell blood, the man, presumably Peter, says. No, I felt his emotions, Jasper answers. He felt a mating bond form. The wind is this way, so he must have smelled Kate before she could. The vampire's eyes go wide and Emmett breaks into booming laughter. Damn, Garrett and Kate, what have thought? Wow, is it always so intense when mates find each other, I wonder? The newcomers introduce themselves indeed as Peter and Charlotte, and we settle into a discussion of mating bonds in a situation with two adult vampires and no outside threats. This is apparently the normal way to claim a mate. Peter and Charlotte tell their own story, that with Jasper as their sire instead of the deranged Maria, they were able to form a bond immediately, but that it was weaker at first, with Charlotte still being a newborn and the chaos of the war camp around them. Esmé and Rosalie explain that since in their bonds, one party was human and dying, when the bond formed survival took precedent. Rosalie and Carlyle had instinctively known that it was their mate they were saving, but needed to get them to safety and transformed before being able to claim them. Jasper's story I already knew, of course. It would not be until a few days later that Kate and Garrett emerge from the forest again. They sheepishly walk up to the porch where Peter is standing with a bloodshake in his hand, obnoxiously sucking on the straw to make a loud sound. Seeing how well Jasper is doing had been enough to make Peter and Charlotte love me, and I had been prepared to adore them in return for all the support they have given him in the past with such determination on both sides. We had become fast friends in those few short days. We look on in amusement as Kate and Garrett stand squirming under our scrutiny. Carlisle and Esmé then emerge from the house to greet the new couple. Esmé hugs Kate, while Carlisle sternly addresses Garrett. Garrett, you may be one of my oldest friends, but Kate is as a cousin to me, so in the absence of her own coven, I feel the need to make you understand what will happen if you ever hurt her. Emmett, Jasper and Rosalie are going to explain this to you. Garrett's red eyes wander from Emmett's bulging muscles to Jasper's scars and the murderous glint in the eyes of the by now visibly pregnant mama bear Rosalie. He seems to settle on her as the greatest threat to Jasper's clear amusement. Like I couldn't handle him myself, Kate says playfully, zapping Carlisle with her power to give electric shocks. When he doesn't flinch, her eyes go wide. She zaps Garrett to check and he falls to the ground yowling in pain. Oh right, Carlisle says, I think we did not get around to telling you that on the processed blood diet, you become immune to the special powers of other vampires, at least to Edward and Alice. Give me one of those fucking blood shakes right now, she demands. We all chuckle. Likely your power will work on us again when you join the diet, Jasper says, at least mine has kept working on both us and regular vampires all along. You were the first to start the diet though, Carlisle interjects, therefore you were never able to try your power on a converted vampire. Well, you were still a regular one yourself. It might matter that Edward, Alice and Kate's gifts all are mental in nature, well yours has a physical component. Bella's shield ability has never stopped you either after all. Jasper shrugs. One way to find out, I guess. Kate chugs down a bottle of strongly concentrated bloodshake in one gulp, clearly eager to try. She experimentally gives Carlisle a light shock which he says he is able to feel. She then gives him a harder shock which sends him to his knees. She frowns. Funny, when I gave him the stronger shock it felt weirdly wrong. Carlisle makes a high-pitched noise that clearly tells her his opinion about it being wrong to give him electric shocks. Jasper, however, nods thoughtfully. I noticed something like that too. For example, when I want to send someone some peace to calm them down, it feels no different from before I started the processed blood diet, but when I try to make Emmett feel terrified or anxious for a prank, it feels sort of disgusting. I think it is because we become so much more human now that our gifts develop a kind of conscience. As well. Esmé claps her hands. Well, that is enough revelations for today, Kate and Garrett. I have assumed that you will want to stay here with us for the foreseeable future, so let me show you the room I have cleared out for you. Our family was growing again and I could not be more thrilled. It is the weekend before my final exams and my dad is driving us to the Cullen house. I have done about as much studying as I can manage and decided that I could do with a break. Said break I would employ to intervene with the plans for my graduation party. I have heard my dad talk on the phone with Esmé a lot lately and have a feeling that the vampires are trying to turn this into a way to big thing. When Dad has parked his police cruiser on the driveway, he first goes to admire the progress on Emmett and Rosalie's house. We have kept him away for some weeks to avoid suspicion of just how fast the construction went, instead finding excuses to meet at my place until the basic skeleton of the house was finished. While I let a proud Emmett give the tour, I watch Peter and Charlotte, who are laying the plumbing and electrics, something they have apparently done before for their own ranch in Montana. Rosalie barges in halfway through with a stack of catalogs to show Charlie what furniture she has picked for the nursery to be put in. When the plastering and floors are finally done, Dad patiently listens to everything and admires her growing baby bump. Once we finally make our way into the main house, we are able to start discussing the party plans. Since I do not enjoy loud music parties, I had asked if we could make the occasion a cookout, which both my dad and the vampires had enthusiastically agreed with. Esmé and Dad are the co-commanders of general logistics, making sure everything is thought of and arranged. Peter and Garrett are going to put up tarps and terrace heaters so we can comfortably sit outside. Kate and Charlotte have teamed up on decorations. The three Cullen siblings are covering food and drinks, with Emmett doing the meat and grills, Rosalie the side dishes, and Jasper the drinks. I have only been given the task of passing my exams, so we actually have something to celebrate. Carlisle has claimed the unenviable task of keeping things within the boundaries of reason, which has proven difficult. For example, last week he was displeased to find an unexpected addendum to his lab notes. Jasper, taking his task of procuring drinks very seriously, had roped Emmett, Peter, Kate and Garrett into running some experiments on how vampires on a processed blood diet react to alcohol. It turns out that they can in fact drink alcohol and can definitely get drunk. Apparently for a Civil War or Revolutionary War-era officer, it was not uncommon to knock back half a bottle of undiluted whiskey in one evening. However, after being sober for a century or two, that built-up alcohol tolerance is severely diminished. Sadly, I did not get to see this in person, but all of Jasper, Peter and Garrett's drunken antics were later on described to me in glorious detail by Kate, who had had the sense to go slowly with her drink. Emmett, for once the responsible one, as he did not want to risk angering his pregnant wife, again had had a hard night trying to keep his family under control until they sobered up. Somehow they managed to avoid detection until Jasper supplied his somehow meticulous notes to Carlisle's research to prove vampires are able to safely consume alcohol. The resulting lecture was very lengthy, as most invitees were, at least according to their paperwork, under 20, including Jasper himself, who, correcting for human food intake, should physically be just after his 20th birthday. Carlisle ordered that the party should be alcohol-free. He took over the task of procuring drinks himself and instead made Esmé sign Jasper responsibility over the music. Jasper sulked for a day or so, and I along with him, as I really wanted to see firsthand how the lot of them are as drunken idiots, but we were cheered by Peter and Garrett, promising to sneak in some liquor to spike the punch with. At present we are discussing the guest list. In addition to the assorted vampires, I would like to have a select few of my human classmates there, like my friend Angela and her boyfriend Ben. We did not hang out much anymore since I got sucked deeper and deeper into the supernatural world, and she got busier with a boyfriend in her life and preparing for college. As she will be moving out of state for college, I want to make sure we have a proper goodbye, though she is the one human other than my dad I would have truly missed after becoming a vampire. Emmett and Peter convinced me to invite Mike, Jessica, Lauren and Tyler as well. They had heard all the stories about them, particularly about Tyler nearly running me over with his van and then repeatedly insisting I was going to prom with him. Apparently that necessitates some pranks that the men want to set up. Jasper is glad to help because since his heroic rescue of Lauren from her boyfriend's car, she has been incessantly trying to seduce him whenever he shows his face in town. Hearing that I was glad to invite them and gleefully joined the prank planning committee. One invite that was sent out early was to Renee and Phil, so they would have enough time to sort out their travel arrangements. It had been over a year now since I last saw my mom, and while my feelings about her have been growing increasingly complicated, the more I started to rely on Esmé as a second mother, I looked forward to seeing her again a lot when she called to explain that she was so sorry. But Phil really has a very important game that week, so neither of them could attend the graduation party, and also not the graduation ceremony the day before. It was disappointing deep down, however I was not truly surprised. Thus the number of human attendees would be rather low. I would have liked to have some of my old friends from the Quilu tribe there, but not enough to insist on finding a space to host the party that is not Cullen land with vampires in attendance. They would likely not be allowed or willing to go anyway, even on neutral ground. Dad was very happy though when I gave him permission to issue a general invitation to all our acquaintances on the reservation. He didn't know that I knew none of them would accept and was happy that I wanted to include them. Consequently, he is now rather miffed that his old friend turned down our hospitality. When I last talked to Billy Black, I mentioned the party and that he could expect an invitation, but he immediately insisted that nobody from the tribe would come. "It's okay, Dad," I tell him, "you know how they get about the Cullen family." "Well, it's not right," he says empathically. "I attended the graduations of all Billy's daughters and Lee Clearwater, and I will go to Jacob's if that boy ever gets his head together long enough to finish school. Now my only child is graduating and he can't put his petty grudges aside to share this moment with me, even when we lost Harry this year, and he knows how important he is to me." He frowns. He also got really weird about the fact that the party is a cookout, made some funny comments about what I thought you lot would be eating. On the other side of the room I see Carlisle form a contemplative expression when Dad later excuses himself for a toilet break. He quickly waves the rest of the family together and whispers, "It had not occurred to me to inform the tribe about our change in circumstances. We really should explain the effects of the processed blood diet to them, especially considering Rose's condition. If her child were born and the wolves run into her without understanding what they see, it could end in disaster." Jasper nods, eyes wide. "Let's not shake things up before the party though, or they might cause a scene while the human guests are present." "All right," Carlisle concedes, "a few more weeks should not hurt, and then I will go talk to them with Esmé and Emmett. We should not overwhelm them with a larger number, and the tribe is most familiar with us three other than Rosalie, but I first want to carefully explain her situation now that the pregnancy is showing." Thus all plans are settled. I graduate with good grades, and the cookout is a blast. Some of my favorite moments are Emmett and Jasper roping Garrett into another of their hot dog eating contests, gossiping with Rose, Kate, Charlotte and Angela around a campfire, setting off many pranks on my less desirable human guests, and seeing how proud both my human father and vampire parents are of me. My absolute favorite moment is slow Dancing with Jasper under the starry night, I rather wanted to kiss him and am getting increasingly frustrated with the glacial pace we are moving at, but I don't want to push him when still in the fallout of the whole Alice episode. All too soon the party is over and it is time for the vampire delegation to go visit the reservation. I barely managed to remain awake for their return, but stubbornly insist on staying up to hear the outcome together with the rest. The findings are worrying. They seem to be more upset with this diet than our previous one, Carlisle relays to the rest of the family, even when I explained how our control is now so much better as to make it near impossible to accidentally kill a human. He points at Peter, Charlotte and Garrett, who are standing together. It didn't even matter to them that so far 3 human drinkers have happily converted to this diet with no sign of going back to human hunting. And then there is Rosie. Emmett growls. He seems to need too much focus to keep his anger in check to be able to explain further, so Carlisle takes over. They consider the fetus an abomination. I gave every rational argument about why we should not have to fear about the control of the child, but they are convinced that it will murder all of Forks the moment it leaves the womb. That's it. I'm officially done with a lot of them. I say the tribe was there for me when I really needed friends after Edward left, but this goes too far. Their grudge against you is one thing, but they can't go after an innocent child. Rosalie smiles at me gratefully and Emmett seems to calm down a fraction. Jasper slips an arm around my shoulder and I happily lean back in his embrace. One more thing, Carlisle says. When I mentioned we have some guests staying for an extended visit, the current alpha wolf Samueli complained that they had smelled a strange vampire on the eastern border of their territory some time ago. I know you are all very respectful about the treaty line, but could you perhaps have crossed it accidentally before you knew the exact parameters? The new joiners all shake their heads. Peter even snorts. We could smell the wolf stink miles away. Also, we came to Forks from the southeast, not the direction of the tribe lands. Carlisle frowns. Then I want to investigate what vampire did go there, though we will have to be careful not to further upset the wolves. All news relayed. I finally go to sleep while the vampires plot. In the morning I eventually make my way back to the living room where the rest of the family is congregated. A large map of the area is spread across the dining table, which Peter and Garrett are marking information on, with Carlisle and Rosalie pitching in their specific knowledge of the area. I believe I recognize the borders of the Quilu territory, but there is also a radius drawn out around Forks police station. After all the happiness of the past couple of months, it is a rude awakening to suddenly be consumed with cares, though whatever happens we will face it with the whole family together. It's Victoria. Jasper's voice sounds tinny on speaker through Carlisle's cell phone. I recognized her smell from when she visited here a year ago. Peter, Charlotte and I are not yet done investigating the reservation border, but we thought you ought to know as soon as possible that she is involved. Thank you, Carlisle replies. Stay safe out there. My heart is caught in my throat. Victoria, it seems a lifetime ago that those 3 nomads came to visit us. Now James and Laurent were dead and Victoria was still out there somewhere. Jasper had always known she was a threat. I remember now he had felt that James was her mate and knew she was the sort of vengeful type that would not leave his killers in peace. The family told me when they returned after I saved Edward that Jasper had been amongst the most reluctant to leave me behind because he believed me to be in danger from her. We could not be sure of her motives, of course, but her mere presence in the area made me inclined to believe he was right. The main question now is, who is her target? Did she want to get Jasper and Emmett, the vampires who killed James, or me, a mate for a mate? Surely she has found out that I am not together with Edward anymore. Edward himself can hardly be her target. He has been gone so long his tracks must have disappeared by now. Ultimately, I suppose it does not matter much, though whichever one of us she is pursuing, she will pay for it with her life. Over the course of the day, the large map on the dining table is filled with more and more notes as family members call in with information. Kate and Garrett were next to find a track but did not recognize the smell. Emmett quickly joined them and was able to verify that this too was Victoria. The other 2 carefully memorized the scent and they split up again. Several more traces of her presence were found, as they are all disjointed, starting seemingly out of nowhere and ending the same. We conclude that she must have a vehicle available. Jasper and I contemplate if we might be able to get information out of my father about recent incidents of car theft in the area. Dad is a stickler for keeping confidential information from the police intel secret, but there might be suspicious car wrecks or general trends in car theft that he is willing to talk about. However, we would have to be careful not to tip him off that something was going on. I remember my father works the night shift today and will be leaving soon. Jasper and I quickly head over so we can still catch dinner together. Jasper is quiet on the ride, but I am not in a talkative mood either. I love you, he suddenly blurts out, staring resolutely out of the passenger window of my truck. My heart skips a beat. I tried to deny myself because I know the limits of what I can give you. You have seen how the bond between Kate and Garrett formed. It can never be like that for us. We cannot ever know if we are true mates. We might be, or you might eventually find yours. Maria forever ruined me, but now that we are under threat, I cannot keep silent anymore. I can feel him anxiously waiting for a reply, but I need to pull over before I create a traffic accident. Once my truck is parked by the side of the road, I lean over to kiss him, pushing all my pent-up admiration, adoration and lust at him. He eagerly leans into the kiss and we devour each other. All our cares are forgotten in that moment. Frankly, I would not have been able to tell the date or who the president is anymore. Oh, how different this was from kissing Edward. There was the comfort of his softer and at least room temperature lips, compared to Edward's frozen ones. Of course, there was the unrestrained passion not tempered by a fear of losing control and draining me of my blood. However, the greatest difference was my feelings. I love him. I feel secure in his unequivocal acceptance of me. No self-consciousness, no guilt. I lose myself in his hungry kisses. Eventually we are interrupted by shrill sirens and the decidedly not amused face of my father is staring at us through my truck window. Shit, had we been here so long that it was already time for him to leave for his shift. Explain yourselves, he orders. Jasper clears his throat, an action that should not be necessary even for a humanized vampire. Sir, I wish to inform you that I am very much in love with your daughter and that as she has just admitted to the same, I promise to do everything within my ability to make her happy and take care of her. Today, Dad asks and we nod. Well, at least I won the betting pool, he says, rather smug looking. I wonder how much money is involved and just how many people had bets running on us getting together. To my surprise, he does not sound particularly disapproving, unlike when I brought Edward home. All right, son, I suppose she was always going to end up with someone you at least I trust to respect her. Nothing like that, Edward boy. We all shudder anyway. I need to get to the station. Don't do anything I won't do. Be safe, Dad, I say, suddenly wishing to hug him, but he is already getting back in his cruiser. I love you. We do not feel like going back to the Cullen house to face the family yet, and I still need to have dinner, so we drive on to my house anyway despite my dad having already left. We share some heated up leftovers and talk about our relationship, our worries, our futures. I should call Alice, he suddenly says, determined. Why, I wonder, is there any paperwork left for your divorce? No, he answers, getting divorced is remarkably simple when neither Jasper Hale nor Alice Cullen truly exist. I need to talk to her, because she will still be able to see Victoria's future, so long as it does not cross with ours. The same with your father. At the very least, she will be able to tell if Victoria is meeting other vampires that we need to look out for. You would do that for me, I ask, very touched. I can only imagine how much pride he has to swallow for this. Anything for you, he replies. The phone call has to wait a moment while Jasper and I resume devouring each other's faces. Eventually he does make the call, and Alice promises to faithfully watch out for Victoria and my dad's futures in exchange for a large sum of money. Apparently being cut off from the Cullen fortune is cramping her style. I still don't trust her to actually do as promised, but take reassurance from the knowledge that Jasper surely doesn't either and won't let the efforts to guard the area slack. At this point, I'm exhausted and want to go to bed. Jasper asks if I want him to drive me to the Cullen house where there is safety in numbers. I'd rather stay here to see my dad when he returns in the morning, I tell him. Then tomorrow we can tell your family we got together today. I don't feel like talking anymore and they would know something is up. I'm sure you left a hickey in my neck, Jasper smirks unapologetically. All right, but I will stay here downstairs just in case any unwelcome visitors appear. This is a comfort to me, especially since he honestly states his intentions up front instead of creeping into my room to watch me sleep like a certain someone. Regardless, I barely sleep that night knowing my father is out there on duty in the sleeping town in the pitch black night, Victoria on the loose. Even with Jasper calming me down with his gift to the best of his ability, I only drift in and out of sleep. My heart sags with relief when I eventually hear a key turn in the lock and then the telltale sound of my father's boot stomping up the narrow stairs. He came home. A week later he doesn't. The next few weeks I lived in a haze. My brain still constantly repeats the memory of how just when I started to think the patrols were enough to keep Victoria at bay, 2 policemen appeared at my door at the dead of night. Their earnest faces told me all I needed to know. An animal attack, they said, but I knew better. Dad had been called out to support with a situation in Seattle very irregular, and the agent under whose name the request was made has no recollection of making it. His car was then seen to be pushed off the road by a blurry but clearly very strong beast. It fell off a cliff and exploded shortly after before emergency services could reach the wreck. There was nothing left to bury. My family went to investigate and quickly picked up the smell of vampire tracks. They could easily identify Victoria's scent, but there was another unknown vampire with her hisher smell had been found on patrol the week before, and confirmation that they are in league with Victoria is disconcerting. As a proper burial is not possible for my father without a body, Carlisle suggests that I hold a memorial service for him. Instead, Esmé quickly starts planning, and a large number of people from the local community reach out to help honor the chief that served their town so faithfully. In the end it is tastefully done, unpretentious as I am sure Dad would have wanted it. We rented out the small community recreation center, and many volunteers decorated it with such a superfluity of flowers and black streamers that the building is unrecognizable. There is an hour or so for speeches, then there is space to chat together in groups. I wrote a heartfelt speech, but knew I would never be able to read it aloud without breaking down, so Jasper does that for me while I sob. He adds some words of his own about how grateful he is to my father for bringing me into the world and how he hopes it will bring him some comfort in the beyond to know that his daughter will still be loved by plenty of people. The rest of my family share some words. His colleagues from the police corps tell some anecdotes, both of his bravery and some silly ones from the early days of his career. Minister Weber, my friend Angela's dad, puts his usual Bible verses aside and recites some beautiful poetry. Mrs. Stanley, after a few drinks, too many hiccups, out a retelling of how she lost her virginity to him in the early 80s. In the back of a Toyota. I am disappointed but not surprised that my mother and stepfather do not show up to the memorial service. Esmé and Carlisle stand by my side instead. I am disappointed and surprised that Billy Black does not show up to the memorial service. Being my father's best friend for decades was apparently not enough to weigh up against having to spend an afternoon in a room with vampires, even when we took care to host the event on neutral ground and the vast majority of attendees are human. The room is not entirely devoid of werewolves, though Sue Clearwater, the widow of Dad's other good friend Harry, has come, and her son Seth is with her for support. I last saw Seth about a year ago, when I still hung out on the reservation with Jacob Black, and at the time he had been in his early teens. Now he is a full head taller than me, ripped like a professional bodybuilder, and looks over 20. Only phasing into a wolf could achieve that. Towards the end of the event I spy Carlisle quietly exchanging some words with a wolf on the edge of the room. The day after the ceremony I officially move into the Cullen house. After this active attack from Victoria, we collectively decide that it will be safer for me to live with the protection of the entire family. I had been staying there already so they could take care of me in my grief, but now it is time to move my personal effects into my regular guest room, which Esmé had long since converted into a proper bedroom for me, which is exactly to my taste. Something feels very definitive about seeing my familiar books not stacked in my cramped room in Dad's house, but displayed on the spacious shelves here. Especially with the photo of my father positioned between my collection of Jane Austen paperbacks and a compilation of the complete works of William Shakespeare. Staring at the picture I am suddenly driven to action. I shake my head as if to clear the fog from it and dash off to Jasper's study. I think we should move up the timeline for my change. He frowns at my sudden declaration. But you wanted to wait until my mid-20s? Yes, I cut him off. That was because I do not want to be frozen as a teenager forever with the processed blood. I don't have to be though. I sit down in the spare chair and explain my reasoning. Victoria killed my father. That means we now know that it is specifically me she is targeting, or at least me first. As a human I am vulnerable. I know that as a newborn vampire, I will be uncontrolled, that I won't immediately be a good fighter, but at least she won't be able to snap me in half with her pinky finger anymore. Jasper carefully regards me and strokes one of his long pale fingers across the back of my hand. Their point is not unreasonable. Should Victoria attack again, then moving you between hiding spots would be much harder as a deranged newborn as opposed to a cooperative human, but that risk is largely negated by the advantage you state of your reduced vulnerability. Moreover, if we start you on processed blood immediately, there is a good chance you can skip out on most of the newborn bloodlust. Craziness. But I ask him as I sense there is more to it. But I am concerned about turning you so quickly after the emotional shock you just had with Charlie's death. He pauses a moment before he explains. Edward has issues, as you are surely aware. Carlisle has several theories about their origins. One is that he was changed too young as a volatile teenager. Another is that he was changed in the middle of the Spanish flu pandemic. For weeks, he would have been hearing news of his friends dropping down left and right, reading rising death tolls in the papers. Then, at the culmination of that trauma and dragging anxiety, he loses both his parents before dying himself. If vampire bodies are frozen, are their brains as well? Do the neural pathways that form the personality remain as they ever were, or can we grow? I will never forgive Edward for his treatment of you, but at least I could somewhat understand why he acts that way if he is perpetually frozen in a state of shock and despair. I frown. Perpetually frozen in a state of shock and despair sounds like a fairly accurate description of Edward's behavior. Jasper swallows thickly. Rosalie had issues as well. You know her story. She was deeply traumatized by the violent sexual assault that she suffered. Meeting Emmett only marginally improved it. She has been doing much better since her pregnancy started. But Carlisle, Emmett and I wonder if she is merely relatively feeling better for being able to have a child, or if her brain is actually processing the Trauma and healing it. Now the same goes for Esmé. While she had more time to work through her trauma, it literally drove her to suicide, and she was turned into a vampire in the middle of an attempt. I can feel her emotional climate becoming more stable, but I cannot be sure why. With only 2 such test cases and a fairly short experiment, I would rather you give yourself a little longer to mourn. Jasper looks in my direction, but his eyes stare 1,000 yards into the distance. Ultimately it is your choice, he finally says. I would not take that from you, and if you wish it I will be the one to change you. I would not hold that over your head to force your hand. The unlike some people is implicit in his words, but please look at all the angles before you do something irreversible. Carefully I consider his words. I had always hated how Edward dictated my life, especially where the matter of me changing into a vampire was concerned. I had to put that aside as this situation was very different. Jasper did not deny me, he promised to comply, even if he advised against it. Most importantly, his arguments all originated with care for my well-being, not some overinflated moral code that he imposed on me. Alright, I say softly, I'll give it some time. He kisses me softly, not a kiss of passion, but one to convey all his love and support in a way that words just can't. July bleeds into August as I continue to vaguely exist in a state of mourning. With high school done and college not starting until September, I gratefully take the break to come to terms with my loss. My family gives me all the space I need to process my feelings and are always ready to talk when I need it. Jasper is of course perfect. It cannot be easy for an empath to be joined at the hip with a grief-stricken human, but he never lets any discomfort show. He holds me during every setback and celebrates every little victory with me. When I see a flash of Emmett's dark hair in the corner of my eye and for a moment think it is Dad and break down, Jasper holds me. When we are grocery shopping and yet another Forks inhabitant offers their condolences and I have to fight back my tears to not have a fit in public, he stands beside me. When I drink a cup of coffee, remember that I like it exactly the way Dad used to, and for the first time it makes me feel nostalgic rather than sad. He smiles at me. Now that the start of college approaches, I have to shake myself out of it and start making arrangements, though at least I make myself, because doing nothing is starting to drive me up the wall. I had thankfully been accepted into the University of Washington in Seattle, which is within reasonable driving distance of Forks for weekly visits, if using an energy-efficient vehicle that is for this purpose. Rosalie and Emmett have been giving my truck an overhaul. The Cullens had been pushing me to accept one of their cars or a new one, but after Dad died, they finally accepted that I would not be able to part with the truck because of the many memories attached to it. Rosalie basically gutted the entire inside of my truck and put a new, much more efficient engine in the skeleton. The thing looks just the same on the outside, but now purrs when I drive it. Jasper and I actually made it to Seattle on less than 1 tank of gas when we went to have a look at the campus. One thing I am grateful for is that I will not be on my own there. Jasper I had expected to come with me, but I was surprised to learn that Garrett and Kate quite fancied to see what the whole college thing was about as well. Neither of them had had any formal education as a human, nor had they made the attempt as a vampire. Jasper got some paperwork forged for them, but he and Carlisle insisted they actually sit the GED to make sure they have the proper base level of knowledge to not sound suspiciously weird to any of the human students. I still wonder how much of their decision was influenced by the security of having 2 extra guards near me on campus, but they do seem genuinely excited at the prospect. Security of course is still a concern. Victoria has been laying low since killing my father, but is still out there. Her home base has presumably been near Seattle, as her tracks were previously most concentrated there. However, after Jasper, Kate and Garrett set up a small house near campus there and started marking the territory as theirs, she disappeared again. Jasper is now reasonably convinced that I will be able to safely attend university with so many humans on site. She will not dare to cause a scene and anger the Volturi. Additionally, at least one of the 3 vampires attending with me should always be near enough to help defend me. Both Jasper and Garrett are exemplary fighters, and they have been training Kate well, who has the additional advantage of her electric shock ability. All in all, the biggest challenge of the operation was choosing what to study, and Garrett was the hardest of the lot. Oh, he had no shortage of interests, but there are very few classes that it would be wise to unleash him on. His first pick of political science was immediately vetoed by both Jasper and Kate, and as a Revolutionary War veteran, even he had to eventually admit that was not a good idea. Next he considered history, but Jasper shared his experiences of how frustrating it is to be taught wrong information and not be able to correct it without explaining that you actually lived in that era. Eventually he settled on an art program, somewhat to our surprise, but definitely to our relief. The next hardest choice was mine. Going by passion I would have picked English literature, but due to the lack of viable careers in that field, I could not bring myself to, even if the Cullens insisted I should not worry about money anymore. For a more practical pick, I had contemplated mechanical engineering because assisting Rosalie with working on her vehicles and machines had made me realize I truly enjoy that. However, when I saw how much of the syllabus consists of math classes, I decided I would not force my human brain to do that, but return to the subject at some point in my vampire future. Kate did choose the mechanical engineering program as she had become determined to be in charge of the second blood processing plant that would be built at the Denali settlement. For that purpose, she would not strictly need such deep knowledge, as Rosalie had by now improved the dehydration machine design to the point that it is no harder to assemble and operate than following an IKEA manual. However, Kate wants the skills to keep improving it as well. For myself, I eventually found a middle ground between fun and useful. When I read up on the journalism degree, I would still get to occupy myself with language just in writings about current events, rather than old fiction. It was oddly exciting that rather than consuming the written word, I would largely focus on creating it. Also, the job prospects, while not overwhelming, are sufficient for the reasonable expectation to be able to keep a roof over my head. Jasper simply immediately chose the same as me, and I have a feeling that he would happily have studied ballet if that was required to stay close enough to protect me from Victoria. He did produce some reasonably convincing excitement though, as this is a degree he has not studied yet and it closely aligns with his own interests in historical research. Next in the preparations for this new phase of my life is packing up Dad's old house. I can't bring myself to sell it quite yet, but I need to at least sort out the stuff in there before I move out of town. Thankfully, it is not a very large house, and my father was not the type to spend needlessly on useless junk. The only category of items that there is an excess of is fishing gear. I go to the diner where Sue Clearwater works to beg her to take it off my hands and distribute it among Dad's and her late husband's fishing buddies. She laughs and insists on giving me a free lunch, and since the diner is quiet that day, we spend a surprisingly pleasant couple of hours with her telling me stories of my father when he was younger. Likewise, there is at least 60 kilos of fish stored in the 2 freezers in the garage, which I am eager to be rid of. Over a year after her husband's death, Sue has finally finished up her own fish supply, so she borrows a few coolers to transport it all to the reservation. That should help keep her children fed for a while. She told me that Seth was not the first werewolf in her family. Her daughter Lee had actually been the first to shift. They must be eating her out of the house, and I suspect her salary at the diner isn't much also. Well, my dad had a generous life insurance policy through his job. I remember him saying that Harry Clearwater had made no such arrangements for his dependents. I have not forgotten that she was the only one of Dad's friends from the reservation who could be bothered to attend his memorial service, and silently promised to myself to check in every once in a while to see if I can help. But the fish and the fishing gear gone, the house is really getting empty. All my own stuff had already been moved to the Cullen house weeks ago. The kitchen and bathroom were quickly cleared out. Most of the living room furniture had been moved to the house in Seattle. Esmé had offered to decorate that one, but we argued that with second-hand furniture, we would have a more authentic college accommodation. With each room that was sorted out, my heart got a little lighter. Now the only real task left to do is to go through my father's bedroom, and I have been dreading it. Where my family helped me with all the other work, especially lifting the furniture, I have asked to do this alone with Victoria around. They are not really leaving me alone, of course, but agree that the vampires can give me some space. My guard detail for the occasion consists of Kate and Esmé. They stay downstairs, where Esmé is teaching Kate to knit. The much older vampire wanted to gift some handmade baby clothes to Rosalie, but her knitting skills were limited to the 1,000-plus-year-old techniques she had learned as a human girl in medieval Slovakia. Esmé's skills were at least acquired within a century, though when I look in on them as I go to grab a snack, the fruit of their labors still seems beyond old-fashioned. I cannot say with certainty what it is, but it appears to be an incredibly frilly lacy baby bonnet. Not wanting to be asked for my opinion on this creation, I quickly make my way back upstairs. I have already sorted through the entire wardrobe, and all of Dad's clothes are now bagged up outside his bedroom door. There is one pile of work uniforms that we will be dropping off at the station later today, a couple of bags of clothes that are in good enough condition and style that I will let Jasper have them if he wants them. The rest is split between donation and recycling. With a sigh, I turned to the small desk next to the window. The clothes had still been relatively unpersonal. I had handled his laundry often enough to not even be embarrassed at going through his underwear. However, in this desk, I had no idea what I was going to find. There is one drawer which I know to be empty. That one had held a small safe with the most important paperwork: the deed to the house, our birth certificates, Dad's life insurance policy, his pension plan, a copy of his will, etc. He had shown it to me when I moved in and quizzed me several times to check if I remembered the location and the code to the safe. At the time, I had thought he was being paranoid. Now I understand he was a man in a dangerous job who wanted to make sure his daughter would be alright if anything happened to him. It had certainly made it easier to get his affairs in order when my family knew to just grab the box. The rest of the contents of the desk turn out to mostly be likewise well-organized paperwork. There are a few binders of old invoices, contracts and bank statements. There are a few photo albums too of his own childhood, and a stack of letters exchanged with his parents who died before email became common. The only true surprise is a large book-shaped wrapped package that is hidden in the bottom drawer underneath a map of permitted fishing locations in the Olympic Peninsula. I open the card attached to the package and read. Dear Bells. I can't believe you're already leaving for college. Generally am bad at being sappy, but I need to say how grateful I am that we got to live together for a bit before you really go out into the world. These were the 2 happiest years of my life, and I wish we had longer, but at least this time I know you will visit a lot or else. In the meantime, here is something for you to keep track of all your adventures in. I'd tell you not to do anything I won't do, but you have always been very responsible, and your young man is a trustworthy sort, so I tell you to not forget to have fun. You make me very proud. Love you. Dad. Tears silently streak down my face as I read the words again and again. He must have written this weeks ago, sometime in the week between when I got together with Jasper and his death. I carefully unwrap the package, and inside I find a beautifully bound empty diary. I stroke a finger down the cover and contemplate how my father must have felt at the prospect of me leaving him again, how he, notoriously bad at outing emotions, must have gone out of his comfort zone to come up with a nice goodbye gesture. He likely had to ask someone for help, probably Sue, the embroidery on the cover. Looks tribal in style. Come to think of it, she had asked me if I found anything special while cleaning the house. I cry some more as I think of how little time I got to spend with Charlie, partly by my own fault. It had been me who stopped visiting as a child, though how much of that was me, and how much of it was my mom insisting that I should hate forks at that age. I had not been able to see how much Dad tried. Dad wasn't someone to show the open affection that I would have understood as a child. He was the sort to get up at 4 a.m. to put snow chains on the tires of your truck so you can drive to school safely without ever telling you. I remember seeing some odd gaps in the transactions on Mom's bank account when I took over the bookkeeping for our household in my early teens. Expenses like school fees and healthcare costs that should have all come out of her account but did so irregularly despite the creditors assuring me that all is settled. The discrepancies are now finally explained by transcripts in the meticulous administration in my father's desk. Seems like he stepped in any time Mom blew her entire income on pottery classes, again despite already paying through the nose on alimony and child support, an amount that should have been sufficient for her to raise me on, not even counting her own salary. Would it have made a difference if I had known such things earlier? I sure hope so, but Dad would never have talked badly about Renee, and she probably didn't even understand how irresponsible she was. Eventually I finish up sorting out the room. I box up some memorabilia that I want to keep and designate most of the other stuff to go to charity. The diary I carefully put in my handbag. I don't want to share that with anyone else quite yet. While I worked, my guards finished their unholy knitting creation, and I wonder if I could somehow get rid of it before Rosalie ever has to see it. I'm not setting anything on fire in my precious truck, but I dread to think of how badly Rosalie would freak out at the prospect of people putting her child in this monstrosity, or actually she might adore it. I remember that she hails from roughly the same time period as Esmé that might have left her with a similar taste in knitted baby things. We soon arrive at the Cullen house, and my window of opportunity to intervene has probably passed. Jasper helps me quickly unload the truck, and then we go to say goodbye to Peter and Charlotte, who are leaving today. They announced this plan some weeks ago when Jasper and I started working on our college preparations. They had never attended college, but unlike Kate and Garrett had absolutely no desire to around Forks. They had little to do now that Rosalie and Emmett's house is nearly finished in the Victoria situation. They are some help with running patrols, but they figured it would be much more useful for them to ensure we have another base to operate from at their ranch. For one, they want to be prepared to host me when I am turned into a newborn, which may be any time with Victoria still out there. Also, they want to add a nursery to the ranch, so Rosalie and Emmett have a place to run to if things get hot with the baby. None of us like the way the wolves talked about her. This piece of generosity elicited the largest hormonal crying fit to date from the mother to be sometime around the death of my father. Her pregnancy hormones had switched from inciting rage to unstoppable crying. Charlie had been very supportive of Rosalie, so she had counted on him becoming something of a bonus grandpa to the baby, since her own dad Carlisle was physically less than 5 years older than herself, thus his death had hit her very hard as well. I see she is bawling her eyes out yet again, her arms in a vice-like grip around an uncomfortable-looking Peter, while Emmett quietly tries to console her. Charlotte meanwhile is talking to Kate. They are discussing the details of getting the parts for another blood processing machine shipped to Montana. Jasper and I join the two women and observe Peter's predicament with a great deal of amusement. Though we are sad to see Peter and Charlotte go, we agree that their plan makes sense and is of great support to us. Yet another set of goodbyes, but at least these loved ones we would see again. I am tired from all the work and crying today, but before I go to sleep I carefully take my new diary out of my bag, I tuck the card with Dad's message securely inside the cover and begin to write on the first page. Dear Dad. It has been 6 weeks 2 days and approximately 18 hours since you have been gone. I have been counting, and I think this is the moment to stop. It has been hard to let go most of all, because they never found your body to physically prove you left this earth. There is no grave or urn to remember you by, but now I have this diary, and it somehow feels like I can talk to you through it. I found it while clearing out your house, our house, which I finished today. I think you would like what I have done with your fish hoard. I shudder and pull my thick winter coat more tightly around me as Jasper and I walk from our car to the building where our first class of the day is held. The decorations adorning the campus put me in a bittersweet mood. It is early December, and soon I will have my first Christmas without my dad. We have been at university for over 3 months now, and I love it. Journalism had been a good choice. Researching and evaluating sources suited my meticulous detail-oriented character, and the writing appealed to my love of language. Learning more about how society, politics and economics work through the lens of news media broadened my horizons. Studying the work of foreign correspondents, I compiled a list of places I would want to visit once I was a vampire and could travel to remote places more easily. Jasper enjoyed it too. He often remarks how much easier it is to be in a classroom when A, he does not want to eat everyone, and B, his empathic ability is not overwhelmed by teenage hormones. Of course, he says he would have enjoyed any college program as long as he is together with me, but he had not studied this particular major before and finds the journalism classes interesting. I believe it is somehow cathartic to him after having read so many incorrect history books to learn how to help ensure that modern history will be captured accurately. His own history book, which he had spent most of last year writing, had recently been published. I can't help but tease him every time I see J. Whitlock and gold embossed letters glitter at me from the spine of a book under the arm of someone from the history faculty. That journalism shared a building with how funny it would have been if he had decided to study history and they discussed his own book in class. I have nothing on Garrett though, who ordered a whole stack of the books for a yet to be determined purpose. He has been getting better at using computers, but still has a tendency to leave the screen unlocked with something personal like his email or Amazon order history open. I closed the browser before Jasper could see and hid the package in his and Kate's room when it arrived, but I have been wondering ever since what he is planning to do with the books. My most likely theory so far is that he wants to give everyone in the family a copy for Christmas. Kate hasn't said anything either, and she has to know considering how often the two disappear together to run patrols. I too take our safety very seriously, but even the Victoria situation does not warrant this many. They could just say they want alone time together. Speaking of Victoria, she seems to have moved to Portland. Her tracks lead south. It is the nearest city big enough to sustain human-eating vampires for an extended period of time, and the amount of missing people reports on the news has gone up for the area. The tacticians in the family are becoming increasingly conflicted on what to do with her. The temptation to just make a grab for her and be done with it is great, however we still have no idea what other vampires are working with her and what they would do if she is killed. The consensus is still that it is best to keep gathering intelligence, but increasingly sways toward planning an active attack. Sometimes I wish we still had the help of Alice's powers. If only she would tell us just what vampire she sees Victoria meeting with. It would already be so much easier for us to make plans. However, after the stunt she pulled with my father, I would not trust her information, even if she gave any. Today I am determined not to care about either of the madwomen in my life, though it is Friday, and after classes end we will drive over to Forks for the weekend. 5 p.m. on the dot, we are packed up and ready to go, all sharing one car. Kate is behind the steering wheel, Garrett next to her fiddling with the radio. He eventually settles on an indie rock station. I sit in the back with Jasper and use the long drive to write an entry in my diary, which is steadily filling up. Dear Dad. We are driving home to Forks for the weekend, and if I could I would of course have dropped by your place for dinner and a chat. It would have been the highlight of my week. Instead, I most look forward to seeing Rosalie again. She is nearing her due date and positively glowing in this late stage of pregnancy. Her hormones have also calmed down somewhat, making her more pleasant to be around. This, to the great relief of her long-suffering husband. Emmett still indulges her every whim and spends most of his time applying the last finishing touches to their perfect little family home. I pause my writing even in this diary, which my dead human father will never read. I still edit out all supernatural elements. Truth is that it remains hard to estimate Rosalie's exact due date because we don't know when she should have had her last period, and she varied how much human food versus blood shake she consumed in the first months. To the best of our knowledge, she is between 7 and 8 months pregnant, and she does look about ready to burst already. Carlisle assures us that by now, even at the most conservative estimate, Rosalie should be far enough along to give the baby a viable chance of survival if it were born prematurely. Since they won't be able to take Rosalie to a human hospital without breaking the Volturi secrecy laws, the whole family has been busily preparing to help her through a home birth. Carlisle has reduced his hours at the hospital and made sure a backup doctor can cover for him when the time comes. Esmé has somehow crammed an entire midwifery course, including practical rotation, into the half year we had between finding out and the estimated due date. She on her own should already be enough help to deliver the baby barring any serious complications. Jasper, Garrett and Emmett have made contingency plans for every eventuality any of us could think of. What if the Volturi find out? What if the child is uncontrollable and attacks humans? What if Edward and Alice return? What if a human gets close to the child and realizes it is not natural? What if the wolves attack? The answer to a disturbing amount of the scenarios is violence. My contribution has been to think of the human details that my vampires would forget. It had been nearly a century since any of them contemplated having a baby, and the world has become a lot more complex since then. It won't do to get CPS after us, and I have at least a vague idea of what paperwork we will need to uphold appearances. After all, we will have to be very careful about exposing the child to the regular world, and raising a child entirely hidden in your home tends to look like child trafficking. With some help from Jasper's favorite forger, we believe we now have the situation in hand. Considering my function as the intermediary for the paperwork, Rosalie and Emmett have had to tell me what they plan to name their baby. I feel very smug to be the only one in the family to know and have kept the secret religiously, even from Jasper, to his great dismay. None of those are exactly details I could have shared with my father. My thoughts wander to more innocuous topics. Kate's efforts at learning to knit baby clothes still continue. She has now absolutely mastered the art of producing Edwardian-era style garments with an unholy amount of ruffles. When the weather turned colder, she made me something which I think is supposed to be worn as a scarf. I don't know how to further explain to Dad about my efforts to get Esmé and Kate's knitting styles out of their birth era. I had asked Sue if I could borrow some of her old knitting pattern books for Kate to work from, so that the style would at least be closer to the 1990s than the 1890s. I wanted to write how amused she had been her son Seth came to drop them off, seemingly the only werewolf with no scruples about vampires. I wanted to tell Dad how much I miss my old friends from the reservation and how happy I am that at least one of the tribe has put the stupid creature prejudice aside and is now on speaking terms with my family again. Hey kids, want something from the drive-thru? Garrett interrupts my reverie. I am quite hungry, so I pass on my order and Kate pulls over. Right as we approach the order window, I suddenly feel two sharp teeth sink into my neck. Ooh, Jasper, what the fuck, man? I cannot make out whether Garrett or Kate is shouting, but the car jostles again, the teeth leave my neck, and someone is growling. No, suddenly mate, my hearing is getting vague as a burning pain takes over all other sensation. More venom. I barely catch the end of the sentence before teeth pierce my skin again, this at the pulse point at my left wrist, and I can feel more venom entering my system. The already all-consuming burn somehow doubles, and I lose my grip on comprehension. After an unknown amount of time, I am gradually getting acclimatized to the burn and perceive some input from my environment. There is a sense of movement that makes me believe the car is driving again, and I feel I am laid out flat on my back now. Most overwhelmingly though, there is a scent which after some consideration I identify as Jasper. I try with all my might to focus on that rather than the burning, and it helps. Some thinking of Jasper makes me remember a conversation we had about how the change goes, how I might be able to retain more of my memories if I manage to focus on them during the change. Immediately I pull up all my memories. Of him, our first meeting, our first kiss, his changes during the bloodshake experiment, how much happier he became after Alice and Edward left. I cling to the memories and through them remember the rest of the family cooking dinners together at my place to eat with Dad, finding out about Rosalie's pregnancy, helping build Emmett and Rosalie's house, talking with Carlisle, baking with Esmé, pranks, games and parties with Emmett, Garrett, Kate, Peter and Charlotte. As I lay there I focused on my memories, on trying not to scream, and the scent and strange warmth of Jasper next to me. The burning was nearly bearable this way. Afterwards Kate and Garrett would tell me in great detail exactly how my transformation went, with strong emphasis on their frustration with Jasper. Jasper again, what the fuck? Garrett seemed to finally get through to him once they were back on the highway. Kate had somehow managed to maneuver the car out of the drive-thru without any of the employees spotting what was going on inside. Jasper meanwhile was mostly confused. Why isn't she screaming? They always scream. Can we even turn someone into a normal vampire while on the bloodshake diet? Garrett shook his head and instead chose to confer with his mate. Kate, we should head over to Peter and Charlotte. Already changed course for Montana, she replied. Can you call to warn them and to get the exact coordinates that we need to navigate to? Such practicalities were quickly dealt with. Then came another necessary phone call. Carlisle, we have a situation. Garrett started. He wondered how it must sound at the other end of the line, with Jasper still muttering to himself and Kate cursing behind the steering wheel. He struggled to find words to explain. I wonder if it was the diet that made Jasper suddenly able to form a mating bond despite his past. Carlisle reacted to the story. The only other feasible explanation is if his creator has died. He'll ask around, but if Peter and Charlotte haven't heard anything about Maria, I'm not likely to find out anything. Either I have no acquaintances that keep up to date with the South other than them and the Volturi, and the latter I prefer not to call until Rosalie's child is safe. Of course, Garrett answered, already redialing Peter's number. Before he even hit the call button, Kate spoke up. Garrett, the tank is nearly empty, we're going to have to hit a gas station. Slowly he turned his eyes from his phone screen to his mate, passing over the rearview mirror, in which he saw Jasper still frantically inspecting his deadly silent human girlfriend, who was in the middle of changing into a vampire. "Fuck me," he whispered, empathetically staring into Kate's eyes. The end.